The main character kept having the same dream over and over again. In this dream, she, a little girl, sits on the lap of a man who shows her some book and then reads it, but she cannot see the man himself. This mysterious and interesting book is called The Wolfer Story. This book describes the story of the life and death of the crown prince whose name was Enoch Silas. It was he who saved an entire continent from an evil dragon with his companions. Thus he changed his destiny. But besides the male character in the story, there was also a female character. The poet girl pointed to one of the lines in the book and mouthed that the girl in the book had a name too. At this point, the man without a face smiled as he looked at the girl and remarked that she was absolutely right about that. Then the stranger said that the main character of the book was named Elizabeth, and then he pointed to the girl herself and said that it was her. The little girl could not believe that the man in her dream had named her the main character in this fascinating story. It seemed impossible that she was the brilliant sorceress of this world, the warrior and lover of Enoch, the crown prince of the empire. In other words, the main character's name was Elizabeth Lilly. But the girl could not fully believe that everything said above was true after all, whether she really is the beloved of the prince. Unfortunately, the girl's reality was different from the one described in the book, and fires and riots were raging all around, and some people were so caught up in the ideas of the devil that they were going to kill everyone in sight. One of these lunatics attacked a defenseless girl who tried to run away from him. He held a knife over her head and tried to kill her, saying that she was obliged to give her life in peace for their lord. The worst part was that she had been kidnapped on purpose and made a slave to be sacrificed to the devil. So the little girl found herself in some unknown place, in some basement, where there were no windows, and the opening that was there was covered with bars. The girl looked at the moon through the bars and wondered how long it would last. The masked men wanted something from her. They said that if she didn't want to die, she had to summon evil spirits, and she wished someone would save her. The baby was in a lot of pain. She couldn't take it anymore and didn't want to suffer anymore. So, as strange as it may sound, it seemed to her that the best thing for her to do was to just die and do it right now. Suddenly, she remembered how the man from the dream said that a man would come and save her and showed her the image of a tall, dark-haired guy. So Acheloth Vane, Enoch's magician, a minor character in the novel, showed up. At the same time, this handsome man is her benefactor, but also her personal enemy. But since he is her enemy, why does he feed her and insist that she eat well? He also, like a caring father, put her to bed and adjusted her bedspread. Acheloth also bought her many different clothes. There were so many that the girl didn't realize when she would have time to try them all on, although she thought it was strange to have such warm care. But the girl was happy to have this man in her life, so she hugged him gently. There was another man with red hair who thought Ellie was starting to really like him. Also, Acheloth told one of his servants about being good with children, and the guy said he was good at it, especially when it came to taking care of little girls. So the little girl began to believe that the story might have a new development. And now she rejoiced at little things, like the enchanted snake that sat on her shoulder. At that moment, it seemed to her that someone from the shadow had grabbed her arm. She didn't know who exactly did it. That voice from the shadows asked the girl about whether she was sure she was the protagonist of the story. That voice was trying to convince her that she was imagining it all. It was interested in knowing what Elizabeth would do if it turned out that she wasn't the main character, and that being inside the novel was a delusion. But the girl asked the voice to be silenced, and wondered if she could be a will-less slave who wandered in the darkness. She hoped she could overcome all obstacles and become Elizabeth Lilly, and then tame the evil wizard. Elizabeth was looking at the contents of the book, and the man who held her in his arms said that this story was written especially for her and about her. The girl said she liked the main character the best. The stranger smiled and said he was of the same opinion. The book also stated that the main character, Enoch Silas, was able to defeat the evil dragon and save the continent. But he could only do it because he had the strongest sorceress of this world by his side. At one point, the girl noticed that the main character had a name exactly to the letter like hers. And it was true, for they were the same person. But it was only a dream. Elizabeth woke up in a cell on a dirty concrete floor. She was dressed in rags and wore a grey collar around her neck. Elizabeth was sad, for she strongly doubted that the man from her dream was right, and she was really the protagonist of the story. The point is that every night she had the same dream, where a man showed her a book and told her about the events in it. But the main thing was that she and the heroine of the book shared the same fate for two, and were connected. So, the girl was born in one poor but nice, beautiful and peaceful village. She had a father and mother who took care of her. But one day sectarians came there and destroyed the houses they set on fire and the people they killed. These terrible people worshipped the devil. One of the crazy sectarians also attacked Elizabeth. He wanted to stab her, but the girl screamed violently. And at that moment, evil spirits in the form of wolves appeared out of nowhere. The spirits began to attack the devil worshippers and gnawed them to death. The slaughter continued. It was no longer just between humans, but between humans and spirits. And then, one of the sectarians picked up an object from the ground that shone like gold and was truly a gold bar. One of the masked men realized that if they killed the evil spirit, a stone like this would appear in its place, which was also a magic stone, which meant that they would all become fabulously rich if they started selling these magic stones. The Satanists scooped up handfuls full of magic stones and stared at the girl, as one of them assumed that the spirits had left only her untouched during their attack. Thus the devil's servants learned of her ability to summon evil spirits and dragged her to their lair, where they imprisoned the girl in a cell. After the girl woke up, she looked through the bars at the night sky and saw the full moon, which meant that tonight she would be forced to summon evil spirits again. The girl was very scared and wanted to get out of her prison as quickly as possible. The little girl really hoped that if she was really the main character of the story, then some of the other characters must surely come to her rescue. But after the girl thought for a bit, she realized it was just a story from a book, so she sat down and shuddered even more. At that moment, the cell door was opened by one of the sectarians and ordered the girl to come out, as it was a full moon, which meant it was time to summon evil spirits. Elizabeth did not want to go, so the man pulled her literally by the hand behind him. She was crying and begging to be let home. The child's screams began to annoy the man, so he threw her to the floor and told her to shut her mouth as she was making too much noise. When the girl fell to the floor, she thought she had hit someone, so she apologized to that person. After apologizing, Elizabeth decided to look at the person who had touched her cheek with his hand. To do so, she turned her head and met her gaze not with a living person, but with a corpse. And one of the sectarians had already grabbed the girl again, lifted her above the floor, and said that this time they had prepared more corpses for this summoning. Elizabeth looked at the mountains of corpses and realized that the devil's minions had done it all, and one of them demanded that she summon evil spirits again if she didn't want to end up like all the people on the floor. The worst part was that these people didn't care whether they killed adults or children. The closer the full moon came, the more corpses they needed. The girl didn't realize how many more people had to die for these madmen to quench their thirst for profit. How much more she needed to suffer because of their greed, Elizabeth cried, but then remembered the words of the man from the dream. He had told her then that she needed to wait a little longer, as the main character did not appear immediately. But still, this man must come soon and save her. Just then, footsteps sounded down the hall. At that moment, the doors to the secret room opened, and all the sectarians who had been torturing the girl turned their heads in bewilderment at the sound. The bad guys didn't even realize they were under attack. But when they did, they started fighting back. They thought the devil would help them. But it was all for nothing. One man killed them all. Elizabeth, however, looked at the man who appeared in the doorway and remembered the man's words from the dream, that when the main character appeared, she would be sure to recognize him. Meanwhile, magic circles appeared on the ceiling, which all at once were activated, and the death rays began to kill the sectarians. And so the main character appeared before the girl in all his glory. She realized that he was the most beautiful person she had ever seen. The little girl looked at the man with admiration as she realized he had come to save her. So, behind the girl's back were the corpses of innocent people, and around her lay the bodies of murdered sectarians, and in front of her stood a handsome man. Elizabeth looked at the wizard, but she had the impression that she was looking at the Milky Way, which she had been lucky enough to see once in her life. It was as beautiful as the stars. The girl saw something similar to stars inside the evil spirits, but that glow was hard to call beautiful, rather the opposite, terrible. At first, the man looked at the girl in silence, but then he said that it was all true. That short phrase gave the girl a shiver, for he spoke exactly like the hero from the book she had read with the man in her dream. It was hard to believe, of course, but the very man from the novel was standing and speaking in front of her, namely Ashaloth Vane, also known as the strongest 12th grade battle mage and a student of the Axiom School, he is often referred to as the Axiom School's destructive weapon or the Punisher. Ironically, being one of Enoch's magician comrades, he became a very negative character in the novel, which is why he was called a heartless man. In the book, Echelon was both Elizabeth's benefactor and enemy. If any of the characters in the book asked why she started to hate the man who saved her life, she would say it was because their first meeting was pretty awful. Judging from the plot of the book, there the girl was very much afraid of Ashaloth, so she summoned evil spirits to attack him. Clearly this scheme failed miserably, and the girl got a little whipping from the man. It was for this reason that the magician first wanted to kill Elizabeth, for in that country, summoning evil spirits was considered a serious crime and punishable by death on the spot without trial. But now the girl realized that she should not be afraid of this formidable man, because he will not hurt her. But even knowing this information, she was in the moment very scared. But surprisingly, Ashlot asked her with a menacing look if she liked candy. Elizabeth didn't understand him a little as she looked shocked at the mage, who was also looking at her. There was an awkward pause between them. The man didn't say another word, but reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a roll of blue candy. They were unusual candies, and magical purple candies that could be used in place of potions for magic, so they were considered priceless. The girl was frightened. She thought that the man wanted to restore her magic power and then use it for his own purposes. Seeing her confusion and fear, Ashlot decided to change her mind. He took one of the candies and ate it, and then he put one of the candies in the girl's mouth, and she chewed it, and then she became very happy because the candy was very tasty. Elizabeth chewed and even squinted with pleasure as this candy was stretchy and sweet. The man then asked the girl whether or not she spoke the official language. Elizabeth replied that yes, she spoke the language, and then he asked her what her name was. The girl remembered that originally she had only a first name, and her surname, according to the book, was later given to her by Enoch, so she thought it was necessary for her to give only her first name. But she suddenly thought that nothing bad would happen if she called her last name a little earlier than she should. So she introduced herself and said her name was Elizabeth Lilly. And then the questions began. The man was surprised and asked if she was an aristocrat, since only aristocrats have last names. But she admitted that she was not an aristocrat. After a pause, Ashlot asked Elizabeth how she ended up in this place. She said that she had been sacrificed at first, but then she had managed to summon evil spirits and had been dragged here and imprisoned in the cells. She said the last one in vain, because the atmosphere changed abruptly, and the man asked again, as he wanted to see if he had misheard. She swallowed, for she knew and understood perfectly well that summoning evil spirits was a grave offence. Also, the protagonist knew that the magician wouldn't kill her, so she repeated that she summoned evil spirits. Also, she was a sorceress who possessed the Eye of Truth. The Eye of Truth is a special ability that allows its possessor to see at a glance the true name and essence of a spirit. It's known that even the most experienced wizards take decades to acquire the talent to understand these things at a glance. Ashalot continued his interrogation. He asked how exactly she realized she had summoned evil spirits. The girl replied that the sectarians had told her so. There was another pause, after which Ashalot asked if she had any things she wanted to take with her. The girl shook her head negatively. After that, the man cast a spell and formed a magic circle. As a result, her collar broke. The restraint on her neck was gone, and on top of that she was all clean, which she noticed when she looked at her hands. Suddenly, the girl remembered that the book had stated that the mage strongly disliked dirt, so she realized that she had been too dirty up to this point. The man then lifted her in his arms like fluff, and they rose high into the night sky with the help of magic, much to the girl's delight. The girl realized they were above the forest in the blink of an eye. Ashlot interrupted the silence and said that he was going to teleport once more, so he asked the girl not to freak out. But the next thing that happened was that Elizabeth became violently nauseous and vomited. She was now kneeling in front of the man and frantically thinking about what she should do now. She was very worried that he might be angry that she had gotten dirty again. The mage, however, leaned over to the girl and asked her to hold out both hands. Elizabeth looked fearfully at him and thought that he would only let her go when he had cut off both her hands. As scared as the girl was, she held out her hands palm up and he conjured water in her palms. Ashlot said it was purified water, so she needed to drink it now. Elizabeth calmed down and began to drink. The water refreshed her, so she thanked her saviour. They spent the night in the forest, and when morning came and the birds sang, the girl woke up and noticed that the sun was shining very brightly. The protagonist lay on the grass, covered by Ashloth's cloak, and thought about the fact that there could be no sun in the cave. But then she remembered everything that had happened last night and jumped up, calling loudly for Ashloth. It seemed to her that the man was not here, for he did not answer her cry and call. And then she clutched the fabric of his cloak, for she thought that suddenly the man had left her alone in this terrible forest. It is known that in the plot of the book, Elizabeth ran away from Ashloth on her own, because it was difficult for a child who had become a slave to the sectarians to trust anyone. But the man quickly caught the girl, but she still tried to get away from him at every opportunity. This is what became one of the key and most dangerous mistakes of Elizabeth, the heroine of the novel. At that moment, Ashloth appeared in the clearing, bringing a plate of food and saying he was glad she was already awake. At the same time, the girl remembered that the man hadn't told her his name yet, so when she started to say his name, she abruptly cut herself off and covered her mouth with her palms. The man, meanwhile, held out a bowl of soup to her and asked her to eat, and the girl wondered where he got the soup. Ashloth admitted that he bought it in a town that wasn't far from here. Elizabeth looked at the soup and said that since he went to town, he should have taken her with him. And he said that her circle of magic couldn't withstand teleportation magic. The girl was far from understanding everything about magic, so she asked him again about what a mana circle was. The man hesitated, and Elizabeth noticed that the swirling inside the man trembled as he was confused and unsure of how to properly respond to her question. Ashloth realised that she had no idea what a mana circle was, and the term told her nothing. He began his explanation. Every human being has a soul from birth, and this soul has a mana circle. Usually people have 12 rings, but wizards may have 13. But here's the problem. She only had 2 rings left, which were manifested by his magic, the man continued. He said that ordinary people die when their circle is so badly broken, but she was lucky to survive since she was a mage. Elizabeth didn't fully understand why she couldn't teleport, since under other circumstances, she could use a broken mana circle. In the book, however, Elizabeth could also cast magic with a broken mana circle. Ashloth let her question pass her ears, but asked about something else, whether something like this should be shown on the street. So he began to conjure, so that she could see and understand everything clearly. He pointed to the little man and said he had 2 rings of mana. Then he pointed to a huge soap bubble and said that was the amount of mana needed to teleport. And then he directed the person into the soap ball and said that she should memorize what happens to a person who has a broken mana circle when they succumb to the influence of a much greater force from outside than themselves. So there was an explosion, and the girl realized that when she teleported, the same thing would happen to her as to the little man from the presentation. The girl realized that she would most likely fail, as she had not yet grown to the level of a great sorceress. The protagonist was worried about the question she asked the magician if she could one day be a better person. Ashloth said that as her body healed, so would her mana circle naturally, so she needed to eat well. The girl was honest with herself, and realized that at times she too was afraid of Ashloth, just like the heroine of the book. Nevertheless, the girl sat and ate her soup, with the man watching her. She also realized and felt that he cared for her, and it made her feel warm inside. The girl was glad she hadn't acted like Elizabeth from the book and run away from the mage. So Ashloth brought Elizabeth into the city. She was surprised that there were so many people there. As amazing as this place was, she had no idea where they were. It had been quite some time since the first day they had met, and throughout the days of their acquaintance, he had kept an eye on her. Ashloth acted like a caring daddy and fed her all sorts of goodies. Sometimes he would go a little overboard and even try to spoon-feed her. It would embarrass her, so she would refuse and wave her arms around. As it was, the man fed her, made her rest, and when she was sick, he treated her with his healing magic. Thus, when she fell asleep, they would move on, or rather the man would carry her in his arms. She did not understand how it could be that she had fallen asleep in the forest, and they had been in such a big city in such a short time. So she asked her saviour if he had been walking all night. The mage said it hadn't been long, but her mana circle had recovered a bit, so he moved with her in his arms through the folding of space. The girl was surprised once again, as this was the first time she had heard of such magic. Ashloth said it is a type of teleportation magic and is used to move through space in a straight line that will connect 2 places rather than stretching the body. When the mage finished his explanation, he sighed heavily, and the girl took it personally and asked if it was so hard for him to talk to her, which surprised the young man. Elizabeth noticed, or it seemed to her, that he didn't finish his sentence, so she decided if he was uncomfortable with her questions, she would sit silently in his arms. He said that if she sat in silence she'd get bored, but the problem was that he was having trouble explaining even half of what she wanted to know to her, so he asked if she wanted to continue having such a pointless conversation. The girl looked at him and said that she wanted to know everything about everything. Even though she realized that it was difficult for her to understand his words, she still wanted to. But since she planned to become a great sorceress, she needed to learn the basics of magic as soon as possible. The man thought she was a very strange girl, as she was interested in the theory of magic, but she didn't even ask about who he was or where they were going. The truth is, she wasn't going to ask about something she already knew, but then she gathered herself and said she was curious about his name. So he did introduce himself and said it was better to call him by his first name, without any gentleman or anything else. The only thing he asked was not to say his name when other people were around them. It turned out to be simple. They had just come to a town called Holland, ruled by Elder Lich of Elbana, who hated him. So, here was one of Elban's 7th-generation magic schools, which is also the headquarters for a group of mages called the Control Center. But Elizabeth didn't understand why these people hated him so much. It turned out that he had blown their leader's head off. And then a beautiful gate appeared out of nowhere. Then they went through this gate to the inside. There they saw a huge crystal hovering near the ceiling. Meanwhile, a uniformed girl came out to them. She welcomed them to the Holland branch of the department store of magical items, and then asked how she could help them. The man pointed his finger at Elizabeth and said that the counsellor was to offer him a choice of travel clothes for her to choose from. The woman smiled and motioned for Ashalot to follow her, which the young man did. The counsellor asked to put the girl on the floor for a few minutes, which the man did. Meanwhile, the woman took a centimetre in her hands and began to take her measurements, asking her to raise her arms before doing so. She wrote down all the data she had gotten on a piece of paper and thought about it. After that, she began to fold the magic seal, and a magic circle created by the woman appeared in the air. From the circle appeared different colours and styles of travel outfits for the girl, and the woman smiled and offered her to try on all these outfits. Elizabeth was very surprised. She looked at Ashlot and asked him if she really needed to try on all the outfits on the hangers. The young man didn't quite get her words right, and asked if that number of outfits on the hangers wasn't enough. The female counsellor also questioned the girl about the amount of clothing she needed, but Elizabeth nodded and said she had enough of what she saw in front of her. As long as the girl was satisfied with the quantity, Ashlot asked her to try on the clothes quickly so they could get on their way. Elizabeth took her head in her hands, as she realised that the process would likely take too long. If you remember everything in the novel, Enoch was obsessed with Elizabeth, which is why he was buying up everything he saw for her. But Elizabeth of the book disliked such gestures and cut off all of Enoch's attempts to shower her with various gifts. When the girl read about it in the book, she found it quite amusing, and the consultant was already showing the girl a nice travel dress of the latest model. The woman showed a few more sets, and the colours in which they were made suited the girl very well. In another set, the protagonist looked very noble. Elizabeth was no longer happy that Ashlot had decided to buy her new clothes, as there were too many, and she was already tired of trying them on. The female consultant added that special charms have been put on each set of clothes, so the girl will not feel discomfort when wearing them. Ashlot looked at the girl and asked if she liked anything. At that moment, she felt a strong pressure from him. Elizabeth was uncomfortable. It seemed to her that all these outfits were very expensive for her, but the clerk did the math and said their store had very affordable prices for shopping. Ashlot told the girl that she didn't have to worry about the prices, as he could buy the whole store if he saw fit. The girl looked at him, and that calmed her down a little. The girl looked at the outfits, as they were all very pretty. That was a fact. But they didn't look like travelling clothes. Ashlot noticed that Elizabeth probably didn't like the sets of clothes she was offered. The saleswoman, on the other hand, called the young customer a very fastidious person. The woman then clapped her hands and new sets of clothes appeared on the hangers again. What appeared in front of the girl was what was needed for travelling. The consultant started advertising this set of clothes. It turned out that this set was made in Bokpun's workshop. The cape was equipped with protection magic, temperature control magic, and even identity concealment magic. There was also a purse. Ashlot tracked the girl's reaction to the outfit, for her eyes began to light up with admiration. So the man said they were taking this set and asked to bring some more clothes. And the saleswoman said that she would bring her some more sets now. There was already a pile of beautifully packed boxes on the table, and the woman was thanking them for such a purchase. So, in the end, they bought a lot of different clothes. So the girl thought that it was the very process of making purchases very much liked the young man. The woman asked what they would do with the clothes they bought, if they should pack them up, or if perhaps the girl would like something to wear. The girl said she wanted to wear one of the costumes, so the counselor asked her to follow her, and she would help her put on the costume. The woman opened the fitting room curtain, but the atmosphere behind it reminded Elizabeth of the recent events in the cave. So now she was shivering, and asked the woman if she would be allowed to speak to her while she changed. The man, however, didn't understand what was happening to her, so he asked why she insisted on such a thing. The protagonist said that if he didn't want to talk to her, she could just clap her hands because she was scared. Now the man understood what the matter was, and said that she should not explain anything more. So he conjured another magic circle that lifted the little girl into the air. Thus, the man helped the girl to put on the very costume that she had liked very much before. Elizabeth was delighted, for Ashlot had changed her with magic in just a few seconds. The girl realized that this was most likely made possible because all the clothes were equipped with enchantments. Meanwhile, the mage himself conjured up another magic circle, aimed at all the other purchases. Ashlot then took the girl in his arms and said that since they were done shopping, he was going to pay the bill and hit the road. The woman wanted to put the purchase amount on his regular bill, but the young man said she shouldn't do such a thing this time. Elizabeth, however, finally realized what crest she had seen. It was the crest of Devarim, one of the 7 magical schools that trained wizard engineers. So the girl started shaking again. She said that the sales clerk found out who her savior really was, since he used his magic on her. But Ashlot calmed her down and said that nothing terrible had happened. The little girl was worried about the woman telling the elders about him, but the young man doubted it very much, because their acquaintance worked in trade and would hardly do something that would solve her profits. After that, the magician said that the girl needed to eat well to grow up, so he offered her a night at the inn. The girl agreed to this. While the girl wasn't around, the mage decided to use magic to talk to the person at a distance. One of his interlocutors asked him how and why Ashaloth was in that cave. Ashlot said that it would take quite a long time to explain everything in words and asked his interlocutor to read his thoughts. And the voice was surprised, for Elizabeth's saviour did not like to have mental magic used on him. But hearing nothing more, the interlocutor began to conjure, for he was very interested to see what had happened to Ashaloth. The interlocutor realised that in one of the villages there were sectarians who worshipped the devil. Moreover, they then occupied the ancient ruins. But the most interesting thing was that there Ashloth found an enchantress who possessed the Eye of Truth. The girl was asleep in her bed at the time, but suddenly she was in total darkness. As dark as it was, as scared as she was, she decided to walk a few steps in the dark. Suddenly it seemed to her that this place was perfect for a pathetic slave like her. Then the girl was surprised at her thoughts, but it also began to seem to her that she was back again in the very cave where the sectarians had kept her. Elizabeth stopped. The girl realised that she had gotten out of there with Ashlot's help, and besides, she was no longer a slave. And since that's the case, it's time for her to remember and believe that she's become the main character in the Walfer storybook. But suddenly the girl heard a voice telling her that she had not really believed something like that. Elizabeth, on the other hand, wondered who was talking to her. But the voice didn't say anything to that. It just said that it wasn't particularly important right now. The voice did not understand whether the girl believed that she was the protagonist of the story, because it could not happen that the daughter of ordinary farmers can become the most excellent and great sorceress. Elizabeth objected, for she was the possessor of the Eye of Truth. But the voice spoke again and said that there was nothing special about it, for this very Eye of Truth had already destroyed many people and evil spirits. The girl tried to cover her ears with her hands so that she would not hear the cruel words anymore, because it was not the girl who killed all those people and evil spirits with her own hands. Then the voice said again that did the girl think she was inside a book? What if it was only a figment of her sick imagination? But the girl persisted that she was none other than Elizabeth Lilly. The girl realised that she had to become the one who would become and be strong in the face of many troubles, and then she was sure to meet the protagonist. She will definitely overcome all the obstacles in her way, and then she will become a great sorceress who can defeat the dragon. After all this, the girl woke up and was lying in bed, clutching the blanket in her hand and breathing heavily. It was dark all around. When the first wave of fear passed, Elizabeth sat on the bed and began to think about what if the voice from his dream was telling the truth. She began to doubt and thought about the fact that maybe everything around her was just an illusion, and she was still sitting in the same cave as before. Elizabeth thought, pushed those thoughts away from her, for Ashlot had saved her. But if that was really it, then where was he now? The protagonist called out to the man by name, but she never got a response. She repeated his name again and asked him to never leave her alone again. The girl tried to find the man, to make sure it wasn't all a dream, that the voice was wrong, so she called his name again. Elizabeth called out to the mage once more. Suddenly the door opened, and Ashloth appeared on the threshold and looked at the girl who was sitting near the wall. When she saw a real man alive, she cried with relief and threw herself on his neck and hugged him. The baby hugged the young man tightly, crying and saying that she woke up in complete darkness and did not find him beside her. Elizabeth was shivering and kept saying that she didn't like dark places and also didn't like to be alone. To calm the girl, the man stroked her back with his hand several times. Elizabeth then calmed down, looked the young man in the face, and asked about whether he could sleep with her tonight. Ashalot sighed. He asked the girl about how she wasn't afraid of him, because come to think of it, he wasn't as good as she thought he was. But here was Elizabeth not afraid of him, and the girl said that she was sure that she knew for a fact that he was a very good man. She remembered very well what Ashaloth had been like in the book. The man was not only a cold-blooded man, but also Enoch's best friend and companion, who did everything selflessly, expecting no reward. Also, when Elizabeth from the book got into trouble, it was Ashalot who was the first to come to her rescue, oblivious to their disagreement. Truth be told, she realized that she was off the path she was supposed to be on, so this was going to cause a major change in the novel. Yet Ashalot, who had saved her life, was still by her side. So the girl looked him straight in the eyes again, and repeated with confidence that she knew he was a very good man. Since she was so sure of it, he decided to agree and sleep next to her. Morning came. The girl was still asleep in bed, holding the man's hand tightly and not letting go. Ashlot realized that the reason for this was that she had cried a lot. Ashlot wanted the girl to regain at least one ring of mana. The little girl began to open her eyes. She heard a voice telling Ashlot that he should have called her sooner, since the girl was in such a state, because if she hadn't shown up, things would have been much worse. The man spoke to the snake and ordered it to heal her as quickly as possible. The snake was angry, angered that the man thought the sooner she did it, the better it would be. The snake crawled up close to the girl and said that it was necessary for her to close her eyes, as it was taking a great deal of her strength, for she was not quite well yet. Elizabeth obeyed and closed her eyes, and the snake said it would surely heal her and praised the girl. The magic snake said that when she opened her eyes again, she would see that many things with her and the world around her would change. The girl woke up and sat up on her bed and started looking around. She didn't remember such a room, so she didn't know where she was. At that moment, from the side, Elizabeth heard a familiar voice asking her if she was awake or still sleepy. So, the same magical pink glowing snake that Ashlot had spoken to earlier appeared in front of the little girl's face. The protagonist realized that she was now seeing something she wasn't supposed to see, as that something was supposed to be invisible. The snake smiled, as it too realized that it was being seen and heard. The magical reptile looked at her carefully and thought about the fact that the girl really did have quite challenging eyes. She said that she had finally met a child with extraordinary talent. Elizabeth started shivering with fear again, as she didn't understand where a real snake had come from in her bed. She was scared, and the reptile crawled up her arm and said that the one and scared cute, but she shouldn't act like that as she was a good girl. At this point, the little girl began covering her face with her hands and mentally asking the creature to stay away from her. And the reptile spoke again. She said that she could look at her again because she didn't look so scary. It was no longer a snake, but a human being. It was a young man with long red hair whose name was Vasilios, who also called himself her friend. Plus the man was going to be her guardian and teacher, and afterward he winked at her in a cocky way. The little girl was greatly surprised, as she had not expected that a reptile could turn into a real, living human being. The girl turned to this strange man and tried to remember where she had heard this name before, and Vasilios had already said that she would call the little girl Ellie and allowed herself to be called Vasil. Suddenly Elizabeth remembered who Vasil was, for he was the head of the guild of mages and demons who had contracted with the first mage of this country, Ashloth. Most interestingly, this character did not appear in the book, yet her saviour spoke of him several times. The man always said that this character educates mages, and he's also a pervert who likes to remake the bodies of his students. The girl's imagination painted a very strange and frightening picture, in which the demon took its true form and stood with a scalpel and something else in his hands, and smiled terribly. At that moment, Ashlot peeked into the room through the open door and noticed that the girl was already awake. The expression on the girl's face changed immediately. She glowed when she saw her saviour in the doorway. The little girl abruptly climbed out of bed and ran towards Ashlot, running past the demon who was feeling a little hurt at being ignored. It seemed to Vasil that such behaviour was unfair to her, as the girl had already clung to her rescuer. The young man looked at Elizabeth and asked her if the snake had done anything strange to her, if the demon had suggested anything in any way. Vasil, however, was beginning to resent and take offence again, for if anyone listened to the mage from the outside, they would definitely get it wrong. But Ashaloth himself did not trust his demon. Besides, the demon winked at the mage and said that the girl's body was already perfect and tweaked everywhere. And this remark frightened Elizabeth quite badly. She clung even more tightly to her saviour, trembling, and her eyes rounded with fear. All three moved into the living room of the house and sat on the soft couches. Elizabeth sat beside Ashalot and asked Vasil about fixing her damaged body parts, and the red-haired man praised himself for having golden hands. So, the demon began to list what he had changed. First, there were no cysts in her body, all her broken teeth were now intact, and her stuttering was gone too. The girl was also happy that she could speak much more clearly. Next, the men informed the girl that while she was sleeping, they had moved her around a bit. Now the protagonist understood why she woke up in a completely unfamiliar place. Now they were in a city on the border between Alpenia and Holland. Very soon, they were to board an airship and travel to Erigold. The demon said it was a city of mages, and he described himself as the head of the Erigold Mages Association, and he was also Ashaloth's godfather. Then Vasil pointed his finger at Ashaloth and said that he probably hadn't even introduced himself, and added that the latter was a 12th class battle mage. But that was the end of the bright and cheerful moments, for when they arrive in Erigold, she will have to stand trial. The reason for this was simple, namely she had summoned low-level evil spirits, so the girl once again remembered those very scary times. But the demon calmed her down a bit and told her that she shouldn't be afraid since she was a special child. Elizabeth sighed and thanked the demon for tweaking some of her body parts and telling and explaining what and how to expect her. Vasil noticed that the girl was very polite, so he also asked her if she liked her new body, and if she did, if she wanted to become a demon's apprentice. The demon raised his hand and asked her to sign her name on it for a teacher-apprentice type contract. At that moment, Ashaloth's magic beam flew into the demon, but Vasil was alive, but hurt, as he thought he had done nothing wrong and only wanted to exercise his right as a teacher. But his godson didn't think so, and asked him to take his hands off the child. Ashaloth ordered the demon to disappear, since he had finished treating the girl, so his presence was not important here. Vasil thought he would disappear, because he wasn't a naughty child. Elizabeth's saviour said that the demon was the most ordinary spirit, so nothing prevented it from disappearing right now. Vasil, on the other hand, was very offended, as he had been raised all this time, so he didn't understand how a man could say such cruel things. The demon said that if he left now, he wouldn't see Elizabeth for a week, but Ashlot said since he couldn't wait, he might as well just die. To defuse the situation, the girl raised her hand up and said that she didn't mind him coming with them. The demon glowed with happiness. And Elizabeth suddenly realised that Ashalot and Basil were very close to each other. Ashaloth, on the other hand, was starting to get angry, as he didn't consider himself close to this strange demon, who blushed at the sight. The girl didn't understand what was going on in the room, for she thought that since Vasil was her saviour's godfather and had raised him, they must have been very close. The demon, on the other hand, was shaking a little. As Vasil straightened his back and looked intently at the girl, and said that he thought he was beginning to like her more and more. So, some time passed, and the three travellers found themselves in a new city that probably looked more like a fortress. Suddenly the girl noticed that the men were carrying swords on their belts, So she asked her saviour why they were doing that. The man said the reason was rotten bones. Elizabeth didn't understand what he meant at first, so she huffed, then realised he was talking about the Lich Elders. The man continued to explain. He said that the armed men were most likely either mercenaries or evil spirit hunters. They made their living by selling the corpses of evil spirits to necromancers from Holland. Elizabeth noticed that her saviour's voice had changed slightly, so she asked him about whether he hated all evil spirit hunters. Acheloth covered his eyes and said that these people were unworthy of his attention, but the snake hissed that the man had no patience for hunters of evil spirits. It was known that in the Grand Compact, which dictates the rules for mages, any action that provokes magical pollution is strictly forbidden. But all the mercenaries didn't care about the Great Treaty. They were only thinking about lining their pockets by selling magic stones and corpses of evil spirits. Acheloth said that if the mercenaries killed a few spirits in a normal region, there would be no problem. But hunting evil spirits in a polluted region was a completely different matter. The man continued the story and said that where the border between Alpenia and Holland runs, there is a heavily polluted region called the Great Forest. It was also known that not only the Great Treaty, but also the governments of other countries are against people going into the forest, because if you go there and sorcery, the level of magical pollution will be much higher. In addition, killing, selling, and other actions with spirits in the Great Forest is also strictly forbidden. But there is only one country in their world that allows the hunting of evil spirits, and that's the infamous Holland. In addition, the necromancers here practice magic where corpses were used as fuel, so the streets were crawling with eager people who wanted to get their hands on the corpses of evil spirits at any cost. Acheloth also said that the mercenaries had turned the forest into their base of operations and were making a huge amount of money off of it all by selling the loot without much trouble. He likened the whole thing to a garbage dump, with all sorts of bugs rummaging through it. Evil spirits in turn polluted the space around them, as they released a huge amount of negative energy, and if you kill such a spirit, its corpse begins to emit even more negative energy, and in order to rid the space of this energy, such areas are usually cleaned. There was another option. The corpses of evil spirits were simply burned. But the problem was that the mercenaries did neither the former nor the latter. There were two reasons for this behaviour. One, it cost too much. The second was that it completely deprived them of the profits from selling the corpses. Elizabeth concluded that her saviour had blown the head off one of the elders for that very reason. Snake asked the girl how she had guessed that. The girl's imagination drew, as always, a strange picture, so she thought that since the mercenaries wanted to kill more evil spirits and profit from their corpses and magic stones, the girl concluded that since the mercenaries had broken the treaty, that was why they had received from the mage. Snake hissed that Elizabeth had gotten completely caught up in the moment, and then asked if she wanted to know anything interesting. So, the girl had one question that tormented her. She asked her saviour how it was that he asked her not to call him by his name, and he did not hide his face if he had used some special charms. That's right. The man said he used a concealment spell. It caused the part of the brain that was responsible for recognizing faces to malfunction so that no one could recognize a particular person or object. For a more natural disguise, he had reduced the strength of the spell, so they now blended into the crowd. The girl rejoiced that she was absolutely right, and the snake called her a real little genius. Acheloth also praised the girl. He said that she had a good memory and was good at analysing and absorbing information. Then the man added that for a person who wants to become a mage, inquisitiveness is quite useful in the future. This is where the snake became indignant. It was sure that if Elizabeth didn't want to, namely become a sorceress. At this point, the girl was a little stunned, as she had never really thought about whether she actually wanted to be a wizard before. Elizabeth suddenly realised that she didn't want to become a mage, she had to become one. The man suddenly noticed the girl's strange mood, so when he saw the merchandise shop, he abruptly moved from his seat and approached her. A man saw a magic cube on the counter, pointed his finger at it and offered to buy it. Snake began to yell at the mage as he found another boring battle golem in this hole as well. Elizabeth, on the other hand, wondered what the item was. The vendor said it was a cube golem. The golem looked like a cube before it was activated. Then he offered the girl to touch it. When the protagonist gave her consent, the salesman gave her a cube in her hands. She thought the golem was warmer and heavier than it looked. Vasil, on the other hand, was adamant that Acheloth was buying such a useless thing as a cubic golem. so he pointed to a beautiful leaf-shaped hairpin and told the man to buy the thing for the girl. The snake whispered that if this thing broke, the girl might get hurt, and this beautiful hairpin was made in the workshop. The seller also said that this hairpin is made of tempered glass, so even if it breaks, it won't shatter into dangerous little pieces that could hurt the girl. Ashlot, on the other hand, picked up the hairpin and then asked the girl whether or not she wanted him to buy her the item. Elizabeth, on the other hand, could not exactly understand her feelings and say whether she wanted the hairpin, so Ashlot took it and put it on the girl's hair and said she was quite good with it. Vasile, on the other hand, showered the little girl with compliments. He thought that the girl was very much suited to this hairpin and looked very cute. The girl thanked the demon and the mage and smiled charmingly. Ashlot stroked her head. Night came. The girl went to bed, and Ashlot sat on a chair beside her and was silent. The most interesting thing is that the girl decided to sleep in a hairpin, which was given to her by her saviour. The man offered her to take the thing off, as it would be very uncomfortable to sleep in it. But the girl said that she would be fine as she was. Ashlot looked at her and told her to start falling asleep already, as it was not worth staying awake through force. The little girl said that she tried, but she never could do it. The man asked her to tell her if she had any pain, but the girl said it was far from that. Elizabeth was still worried and thinking that suddenly everything that was happening now was nothing more than a beautiful, sweet dream, and in reality, she was still sitting in that very cave. At that moment, the wizard called the girl by name. The girl was very surprised, so she even sat up on the bed. She stared intently at the man, for this was the first time he had called her by name. Ashlot began to tell the girl that summoning evil spirits was considered a crime in this world, but she would not be punished if it was done intentionally, so she didn't have to worry about it. But that was not the cause of her anxiety. The man was curious as to what else was bothering her so much. Then Ashlot suggested that maybe she didn't want to get up as a mage. At that point, the girl screamed that she could not become something else. Elizabeth realized what she had done and began to justify that she was worried that nothing else would work out for her, even if she tried hard. So if she was blessed with a talent for magic, she should become a sorceress. The girl recalled that Elizabeth from the book had made 2 fatal mistakes. One was that she had tried to escape from Ashlot at the beginning, and the second mistake was that Elizabeth in the book decided to deny Ashlot's desire to become a mage in favour of the aristocratic family that ended up adopting her. Unfortunately, the members of that family she trusted was that they turned out to be secret Satanists who brainwashed her. Suddenly the girl thought she realised something important, so she asked the young man about whether he didn't want her to become a wizard. Elizabeth began to remember all the moments they had spent together. The girl suddenly realised that Ashlot had never once said that he wanted her to continue practicing magic. The little girl also remembered all the episodes in the book, and it only talked about her gift as the reason why the magician saved her from the sectarians. But since that was the case, why wasn't Asheloth trying to convince her to become a mage now? Was it because she hadn't yet shown her talent in all its glory, like the girl in the book had? The young man looked at the girl and said that wasn't what he meant. Asheloth interrupted the silence and said that if she made that choice, if she decided to become a sorceress, there would be no turning back for her, so she needed to be sure of her decision. At that moment, the girl realized that perhaps he thought she could not bear the burden of her own talent. She realized that there was some truth in that, since all she was doing was running away from difficulties rather than face them head-on. At that moment, the girl decided to push all strange thoughts away, for she was Elizabeth Lilly. The girl said she wasn't going to run away from becoming the main character, but she wanted to take a slightly different path until she met Enoch, the main character of the book. Plus, the moment the man stroked her cheek, the girl realised that she liked this Ashelot much better than the Ashelot from the plot of the novel. Elizabeth looked at her saviour and said that it was okay if there was no turning back, because whatever she did, as long as she had those eyes, she would still become a sorceress. After her words, Ashelot said that she was an amazing child, for neither he nor Vasile had told her about the peculiarities of her eyes, but he could see perfectly well that she knew all about it without him. Now the little girl realised that Ashelot had purposely not told her about the peculiarities of her eyes. Elizabeth realised that she had just made a serious mistake. She shuddered. The thought came to her that Ashelot had figured it out long ago. Now the little girl realized that the young man would probably hate her if he realized definitively that she had lied to him. The room began to swim before her eyes. This could lead to their point where their relationship becomes the same as in the book. And Ashalot was already stroking her head again and telling her it was time for her to stop thinking weird things and stop shaking, because he didn't care what she was hiding. But Elizabeth was very much worried. She was afraid that he had been able to read her mind with magic and now knew her secret. But the young man said that he didn't really understand what she meant, but he didn't care about her secret. Ashalot had also admitted that mental magic wasn't his thing, and she wasn't particularly good at hiding the fact that it wasn't as simple as he'd first thought. So, for starters, she trusted him the first time they met, and relied on him like it was the most mundane thing in her life. More importantly, he realized from the start that it was as if she knew he would come and rescue her out of trouble. The girl clutched her pillow and asked him about why he was kind to her, since he realized she was hiding the truth from him. And the magician said he hadn't done anything special. Elizabeth realized that he was too kind and cared for her, even though he knew she was hiding things from him. Ashalot, on the other hand, didn't understand why having secrets was a crime in her mind. Besides, he said her ability wasn't dangerous to him, so he didn't see what the problem was then. The man patted the bed and said it was time for her to go to sleep, and also he wasn't mad at her from the word at all. And then tomorrow they would take the flying ship and go to a new city, so she needed her strength. The little girl went to bed, covered herself with a blanket, and asked her savior if she could keep her secret from telling him. The man agreed to this. Mentally, the girl apologized to the young man as she had her reasons for not telling the truth. However, she said that even though she couldn't tell him everything right now, she did say some things. She thanked him for pretending and being very nice to her as it made her happy. The next day, the three of them went to the flying ship docks. The little girl was thrilled. The snake on Ashalot's shoulder said cheerfully that it was time for them to board and it would be a wonderful time for them. The girl, on the other hand, remembered that they were taking her to her trial. The protagonist had never before in her short life seen an air tower with flying ships. As they looked around, a stately man approached them and greeted them, the girl clinging more tightly to the mage. The young man politely asked the Puncticians if they were related to the Erigel Mage Association. The man admired Ashalot's magical skills, as it wasn't often to find someone with such a high level of stealth magic. He, of course, recognized the mage, but newcomers wouldn't have a chance to do so. Ashalot didn't feel like having this dialogue. He glanced sideways at the men carrying sacks of something and asked if the flying ship was still anchored. The stranger said the girlfriend was in full swing. He told them to follow him as he was going to walk them to their quarters. Ashalot followed the stranger, and the girl kept looking at the blue crystals floating in the sky and asked the mage if they were all magic stones. The guide decided to answer the little girl and said that yes, they were magical stones they called membranes. These stones attracted objects of a certain size to prevent the flying ship from colliding with them and ensure the air tower would run smoothly. The girl suddenly thought that it would not be easier to land the ship on the ground and why the air tower was needed. And Vasil, as if he read her thoughts, and said that the membranes had another purpose. They charged magic crystals on board of flying ships so that they could rise into the air. When Elizabeth heard that, she thought that it was a very handy invention of the mages. Vasil had said that his whole body had been torn apart to create it. Such talk from the demon did not please Ashalot, and told him to stop fluttering his snake tongue. The stranger turned around and took offence. He thought Ashalot was tired of his explanations. He hadn't seen the magic snake. Vasil began to explain to the girl that he was an illusion that was only created for communication, and only she and Ashalot could see him. And the girl thought about what the stranger thought was most likely that she was talking to herself. To distract the stranger from Elizabeth, Ashalot asked him to tell him a little about himself. He thought the man was a battle mage. Noticing his oversight, the first thing the man did was introduce himself. His name was Michael Yulpendis. The man realized that they had to spend 3 whole days together. He was a level 5 battle mage and the best mage of the 2nd magic platoon of the Alpenia Empire. Ashalot, on the other hand, didn't understand what a 5th-class battle mage was doing aboard a cargo ship. Mikhail admitted that this ship would be carrying experimental combat equipment, so he was here as an escort. They were already boarding the ship. Ashalot asked what the Mage Association had said about him. The man faltered a bit, saying that he had been told that a 7th grade assistant mage needed help finding a ship to Erigold, and added that the man would have no problem making the risky voyage. Besides, the commanders had said he could get off the ship himself on the way to the city and leave the mission to Ashaloth. Looking at the 12th level mage's expression, he realized he had been misled. The boy suggested that his acquaintance find him a new ship. Ashaloth said he understood. He was glad they were accepted aboard this ship. There shouldn't be any problems with the mission, and if anything went wrong during the voyage, the reward for the escort would be doubled. Elizabeth, on the other hand, realized that Michael did not know exactly the identity of her saviour, and believed him to be a 7th grade mage. Ashaloth, however, asked another question of his new acquaintance. It was important for him to know if he would be able to abandon the mission once the ship had departed. Mikhail smiled strainedly and said that he and his colleagues would take the case themselves then. They were already aboard the ship, and Michael opened the door to one of the cabins and said they could occupy that room. The girl was surprised that the cabins in this ship were like real rooms. The mage gently placed Elizabeth on the floor of the cabin. Mikhail, however, began to close the cabin door and said he would come by a little later, but for now he asked the mage to get some rest. At this point, Vasil assumed his human form and asked the young man why Ashaloth was so unsociable and not eager to make friends with any of the other wizards. The wizard, on the other hand, turned the tables on the demon, and Vasil said he didn't think it was a good idea to waste his time on people who had no talent. The look on Ashaloth's face expressed utter contempt, and Vasil said that he didn't avoid talking to other personalities, but that he was very often lazy about talking. At that moment, Elizabeth came up to the demon from behind, called out to him and asked him not to be angry, because she knew he had a good heart. But Vasil didn't understand how he could be such a sweet and kind girl. The demon hugged the girl and asked her to hurry up and become a wonderful young sorceress. The girl promised him that she would make every effort to do so. Vasil was pleased and reminded the little girl that the promise made to the supreme demon must not be broken under any circumstances. The girl smiled, but now the girl was thinking about something else. She didn't understand a few things. First, she thought that many mages of the 5th grade were considered very strong and were among the elite mages of the country, then why they needed help. The girl kept repeating Michael's name in her head, because she had heard it somewhere before, but for some reason it was hard for her to remember it. At this moment, Vasil stood near the cabin window and beckoned the girl to him. So they set off and flew across the sky, with a bird's-eye view of the houses of the city from the window. Elizabeth realized that she couldn't remember Michael's name, so she concluded that he wasn't, and so important to the plotline of the novel. On the first day of their voyage, Michael introduced them to the captain of this ship and the other members of the crew. Elizabeth had a delicious meal after that, and then she noticed that she had never seen her saviour eat, or rather he had never seen her eat anything again. And they also spent time walking around the ship, and they had a lot of fun, especially the girl who interacted with the magic snake. But the best part was that even as she slept, her sleep was guarded by Ashaloth sitting next to her bed. A new day had dawned. Elizabeth sat in Ashaloth's arms. The girl was very sad, which did not escape Michael's notice. The girl was very much bored. She realized that there was nothing to do on the ship. Michael realized that something had to be done, and suggested that Ashaloth and the girl go out on the deck and walk around there, admiring the beautiful views there. But Elizabeth's rescuer said they wouldn't go on deck because it was too dangerous, and Michael lamented that he couldn't bear to look at sad children. So the man reached into his pants pocket, took out a candy from there, handed it to the child, apologizing that there was nothing for children to do and see on the ship, and added that he had bought these sweets for his daughters, but he hoped she would like the candy too. At that moment, the girl's eyes rounded. She realized that at first glance, Mikhail was no more than 20 years old. So she looked at him and asked him if he had already had children. Mikhail smiled and said that he looked older than he appeared. After all, most mages always looked younger than their years. The man admitted that he was 40 years old, so he had 2 daughters a long time ago. The older one was 7 years old, and the younger one was 5. But here was Elizabeth wondering if they would be considered peers if she was 10 years old. At this point, 3 pairs of surprised eyes stared at her as everyone assumed she was much smaller. Ashaloth lifted her under her arms to his eye level, and the girl began to talk about how when she was 5 years old, she looked like other children. But then it happened that she ate too little. Michaela tried to calm her down and told her that his daughters used to be skinny too, but now they were big and strong, perhaps the biggest in his village. The man was sure that perhaps they could make wonderful generals in the future. At that moment, pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in her mind. The general, the imperial mage, Michael. The girl, on the other hand, covered her mouth with her hand and trembled as she finally remembered what she wanted. She knew his story. Elizabeth now knew that one of his daughters would not only be an imperial mage in the future, but would also become a general. Elizabeth remembered that her last name had been mentioned in the book in passing, but she remembered the girl. She had once volunteered on her own at the front to avenge the death of her father, who had been killed in Holland by one of the elder Lich. But when Mikhail should die, the girl did not remember. And he was already looking at her intently and asking how she was feeling, because she was too pale at that very moment. Suddenly, the protagonist remembered that they were just now in Holland, so she concluded that the man must have died today. The girl clutched Ashelot's clothes in her hand. She thought that maybe everything would be all right since her saviour was here too. But here's the trouble. It couldn't have gone well. Someone was attacking the ship. The men started looking around for noise and stuff. To keep the girl out of danger, Asheloth used magic and rose into the air with her in his arms. But Mikhail crouched on the floor. He realized that gravity control was broken, but what was happening on the deck, he did not understand. The man looked at Ashelot and said that he would go to the cabin to clear up the situation, as it was clear from the condition outside the window that they were in trouble. So he asked Ashelot to hide with Elizabeth in their room. The mage moved with ease with the girl in his arms past the flying chairs and tables. But here she called his name. There was a question in her voice as he grabbed the snake by the throat and began questioning it about where and for what reason one of the elder Lich had appeared here, Vasil assuring him that he himself had only noticed his appearance and knew nothing more. Asheloth, however, had already begun to twist the snake as he wished, and the snake assured him that she really didn't know anything more about their situation. The man didn't believe in coincidence, for as soon as they boarded the ship and were in neutral territory, the elder he had once blown his head off had attacked them. Vasil, on the other hand, argued that they wouldn't have gotten away with destroying one ship if the attacker had known there was a mage on board. The demon, on the other hand, was suggesting that they all get off the ship quickly. Vasil argued that if Asheloth, as the defender of the Grand Treaty, were to engage in battle in these territories, it would lead to international conflict. Besides, Elizabeth didn't belong here now. The mage, however, was hesitant about what decision he should make, but at that moment a girl approached him and asked him about what was happening on the ship. Ashelot said that as long as Elizabeth was by his side, then she was in no danger. The protagonist didn't understand who, how, or why the ship was attacked. She didn't understand what was happening here right now. She pondered and realized that she should have guessed everything earlier. Suddenly, she heard a voice telling her that if it was a minor character, it wasn't worth memorizing his fate from the book. Her voice, however, told her that they were at a point in the plot development where the main story hadn't even started yet. The voice continued. To him, the girl's flailing seemed funny. He went on and said that never before had main characters ever risked their lives for secondary characters. The voice said that Michael was the kind of character who, under all situations, had to die. The girl suddenly realized what the voice wanted to tell her. She had to accept this development of the plot, because it was important for the further development of the plot of the book. But she didn't want to accept it, so she said that she would definitely be fine, so he shouldn't have run away from the battlefield because of her. Elizabeth looked straight into her saviour's eyes and asked him to help the other humans and mages who were on board. So there was a battle going on the ship. Michael was trying to protect everyone. He was casting sorcery and using a huge hammer and fire in the battle. The man was tired, and he wiped the sweat away with his hand. The problem was that no matter how hard he tried, no matter how much effort he put into it, the fog would not clear. Mikhail and the ship's captain were arguing. The mage asked the man at the wheel to pick up speed as quickly as possible, for otherwise they would die at the hands of the demon. But the sailor said that the ship wasn't moving an inch. The wizard was worried as he realized that they weren't in trouble with an ordinary middle-class demon, but someone more serious, as otherwise he wouldn't be able to get close to the ship, which couldn't move now. The ship was held in place by a huge demonic magic power, so the man concluded that they were being attacked by a top-class demon. The mage looked at his colleague, who coughed up blood, and the thought occurred to him that most likely the demon needed experimental magical equipment, and they were not at all prepared for such a turn of events. The crew, on the other hand, held on only on the strength of protective magic. Michael realized that the protective barrier was about to fall, so they would soon die altogether. But realizing that even though the forces were not equal, and he had almost no chance of winning, but since he was a 5th grade Emperor Martial Mage, he had no right to surrender without giving battle to the demon, so he summoned his fire magic again. The man made a decision. Since he was going to die as it was, he would beat the eyes of the demon that was attacking innocent people to death. He channeled all of his magical power into the hammer, waiting for the moment for a single blow that would do some damage to his opponent. But it was worth it for the man to strike, and as the shards from the former barrier flew in different directions, but behold, the creature was nowhere to be seen where it should have been. So the moment the man let his guard down a bit, a multi-eyed demon head came through the hole in his cheek and opened its maw and tried to eat him. The man covered his head with his hands and ducked down, shouting to the other team members to do the same. The creature crawled through the hole more and more, but then it began to shudder as it felt the power of familiar magic. As Ashaloth had already snuck onto the deck, holding Elizabeth in his arms and covering her eyes with one hand, the demon recognized him perfectly. Mikhail didn't believe his opponent, so he turned around and looked over his shoulder in surprise at the man with the girl in his arms. The mage realized that he hadn't noticed that Ashaloth Vane, the protector of the Great Treaty, had been in front of him all this time, but what he was doing here, the man didn't understand. Besides, the man didn't understand the other thing either. If this was really a treaty protector, he had no reason whatsoever to help the ship's crew. Mikhail assumed that Ashaloth was his enemy too, and he must have boarded the ship to get his hands on the experimental magical equipment. The demon hadn't expected such an encounter either, and was nasty about what Ashaloth Vane was doing here on the ship. Demon wondered if the mage had started working for the Empire, and demanded an immediate answer. Ashaloth said without emotion that she didn't care about the Empire's business, and the fact was that it was the demon that he disliked too much. The girl asked to be told what was going on around her, and the man said she didn't need to see or know about it. The demon thought it was a lie, since he and his kind of creatures had never broken the great contract yet, so why didn't he like them? The mage decided to come up with a reason, which was why he said he didn't like the demon, since he had no brains left in his head at all. So the man had pissed off the demon, so he wanted to attack the wizard, but he repulsed the attack. The sailors, though shaking with fear, recognized the power of the wizard on board. Meanwhile, Elizabeth asked Ashaloth to take his hand away from her eyes, and Michael thanked the mage for his help in the matter, and said he didn't think he'd ever met someone like this in person. But Ashaloth realized that it wasn't over yet. The man knew that any minute now the demon leader Centaurus Balzac would be here on the ship. Now the capital had already gotten into their conversation, he was in a state of shock, and asked if he had understood everything correctly, and one of the immortal rulers of Holland was coming here now. The captain kept yelling and asking why someone like Balzac would attack their ship. The man blamed Ashaloth Vane for all the deadly sins, for he was sure that because of him they would all die today. And at that moment, one of the magic balls flew at the captain, and the mage began to explain that the spell behind his back worked automatically when someone started to threaten him. He was offended that even in such a situation, there was a man who accused him of all mortal sins. Mikhail, on the other hand, tried to pull himself together and asked him to tell him when Balzac's forces would show up on the ship. Vane said it would be in 5 minutes. The man realized that he had no time left for reflection or hubris, as he realized that he could not handle Balzac's powers on his own. Michael bowed his head to Ashaloth Vane and decided to ask the young mage for help, even though it was rather shameless of him. The man continued. He said that the Imperial Army of Alpenia and he personally would never forget such a broad gesture and would fulfill one of his requests that they could. Ashaloth seized on the man's last words about the request, and he interjected, "Did they really fulfill any request?" Mikhail said exactly that. He would be happy to help him. And the girl's saviour looked at Michael and asked the latter if he knew how to look after children. To the strange question from the keeper of the Great Treaty, Michael replied that he was good at looking after children, especially girls, as he himself had 2 daughters. Ashaloth was going to leave Elizabeth with Michael for a whole week while he dealt with this problem, so he would be back for the girl in a week. He hoped the mage wouldn't have any problems with the little girl. Ashlot looked at the girl and said that she was supposed to live with Michael, but only if she was okay with it. The girl was surprised. She didn't expect him to have to fight Balzac for a whole week. So, Vane explained that he would have to fight the Elder Lich for a week, as he wasn't exactly an ordinary opponent, but a dead one, so he wouldn't stop until his life vessel was destroyed. Elizabeth glanced at Mikhail. She realised that if Ashaloth did not intervene in the course of this battle, their new acquaintance would die today. Michael himself could not understand the meaning of the girl's look that she gave him. It seemed to him that she thought him too unreliable. After a short thought, Elizabeth agreed to stay with Michael since she still had Vasile. The snake also said she wasn't going anywhere with the girl. Michael, however, told Ashlot that he would take good care of Elizabeth and would protect her even at the cost of his own life. The mage warned his new acquaintance that if a single hair fell from Elizabeth's head, Ashaloth himself would bring his power down on Michael's head, and he wouldn't get away with just his life. But since everyone had already agreed on everything, the young man lowered the girl to the floor of the deck, and the snake began to crawl over her shoulder. At that moment, several demons approached the ship, followed by their leader with a shout that signalled their arrival. Elder Lich held a skull with eyes burning red fire in his skeletal hand. Then he introduced himself, giving his name. The three people looked up. Ashlot's face expressed no emotion, but Elizabeth and Michael looked up there with great surprise. The demon and the elder were shouting and doing so loudly as they wanted Ashloth to come out to meet him. One of the sailors was trying to hold on to the wheel of the ship. He did not want to die, as he had a bride waiting for him at home. It was the first time Elizabeth had felt such intense fear in a while, so she pressed herself harder against Ashlot. The wizard, noticing the child's reaction, asked the girl if he should give up now. The girl was a little surprised that the man had thought of such a thing, for it was not like him. The voice in the girl's head urged her to nod her head affirmatively, for all the people aboard this ship were going to die. The voice said that even a guy helping her wouldn't make a difference. Ashlot looked intently at the girl and called her name. As scared as the girl was, she said she was fine and would continue to be as well. Since that was the case, the mage gently and soothingly stroked her head, and the movement made the girl stop shaking with fear. Elizabeth stood next to the man, and the man drew another blue-coloured magic circle in front of her. And then with a light and precise movement of the finger of one hand, which was half hidden by a glove, he activated the magic circle. It was a special kind of magic that opened up the space in front of the ship for a few seconds. But Mikhail didn't know that space-folding magic could be of such a scale, but he ordered the sailor to get the ship in there as quickly as possible. Ashlot Vane looked at the girl and told her to wait for her where he was sending the floating vessel now. The man didn't waste any more time talking, but jumped off the deck of the ship straight into the abyss, where Elder Lich was already waiting for him. Elizabeth sat on the deck in the snake's embrace, and all that was left of the mage was a bright, magical light. The little girl almost cried and asked her hero to come back to her alive and unharmed. Thanks to Ashaloth Vane's magic, the ship and all its passengers were in a bright, peaceful and enchanting place. The sailor, feeling safe, stepped away from the helm, crouched down near the wall of the ship, and in one breath said that they had been lucky and had broken away from their enemies. But it wasn't that simple. Hundreds of bats flew into the breach behind them and chased the flying ship. Mikhail was not thrilled with the situation. He realized that they were being chased by a pack of evil spirits. They had jumped several hundred kilometers, but there was a lot of them here. The man realized that the servants of the Lich Elders had no shortage of persistence. The sailor was frightened and decided that he had had enough and decided that it was time to run away from the ship. Mikhail tried to stop him, but he failed. Elizabeth didn't understand how the evil spirits were here either. It seemed to her that they should have been safe. After all, Ashaloth had stayed behind to fight Elder Lich. At that moment, Michael ran up to the girl, bent down to her and asked her to get into the dinghy and run away from here as far and as fast as possible. The man asked one of his deputies to escort the girl to the dinghy and put her on it and send her to safety. Carmen took the girl in his arms and ran. But she was against it, protesting, shouting that she should stay aboard the ship with Michael. With her special eyes, Elizabeth could see the real names of every bat that came near them. The voice in her head was saying that even if she stayed on the ship, she would be of no use. The girl suddenly remembered the words from the book that Michael's daughter had said, that the mage had stayed on the ship, and until the last day he had defended it, fought like a lion. An episode surfaced in the little girl's mind where the now adult Elizabeth had looked at the straight back of a woman, and the woman had said that she looked a lot like Michael. The woman didn't turn around, but he sensed that the girl was crying, so he asked her not to shed bitter tears because of him. The man said he was honored to have fought shoulder to shoulder with her on the battlefield. Elizabeth remembered that one of Michael's daughters was named Kayla, so she asked Carmen to carry her back to the ship's cabin since they had very little time left. The girl realized that she was the only one who could help Kayla's dad right now. The main character looked at the man and asked him to believe her just once. Carmen didn't expect this little girl to know the name of one of his boss's daughters. He didn't understand where she got that information from. The young man frowned, but he also realized that now was not the time for such musings. But Carmen wasn't about to disobey the commander's orders, and the girl resented it as she realized she was being carried to the wrong place, even though she said she could help the general. The man talked about how he was a military man and had no right to accept help from a civilian child. Elizabeth was as frustrated as possible as the opportunity to be useful was draining away from her like water. The girl realized that she herself was to blame for this situation, because if she had guessed about Elder Lich's attack a little earlier, things wouldn't have turned out this way. At that moment, the little girl heard Vasil's voice, asking her if she could help the man in the chopping block. The demon asked Elizabeth to nod her head if she could do what she was talking about. So the girl nodded her head affirmatively and said that everything she had said was true. Now Vasil in his human form said that everything would happen now. So Vasil made Carmen stop and stop reacting to the world around him. The demon had said the girl shouldn't worry about the military, and now he wanted to know the details of her plan. Elizabeth said that all the people could die aboard the ship, so they needed to now. But Vasil interrupted her and said that he didn't care about such nonsense, because people were born by the hundreds of thousands every day, but a child with such a rare talent as her was a real rarity and a godsend. The demon was admitting that Elizabeth was far more valuable to him than all the people combined on this ship, so he wasn't about to let her get involved in anything dangerous. The protagonist couldn't realize everything the demon had just said. Nevertheless, Vasil demanded that the girl tell him the details of her plan immediately, for if it was crazy but had a chance of success, it was probably worth taking part in the adventure. The girl offered to use her eyes, but that option was dismissed by the demon, as the little girl only had 2 rings of mana at the moment. The demon was sure that she would only be able to see the names of a couple of evil spirits in her current state. She didn't stand a chance against the contract. And then the girl thought of summoning. But for a summoner to use the magic of summoning, he must overcome 3 steps. So, the first stage is the summoning. The summoner calls a spirit or a demon into our world. The second stage of this process is naming, that is, the invoker must find the true name of the being he has called into this world, and then give him a new name. The third step is retention, thus a contract is made that binds the spirit and the demon to this world. And so, once the summoner finishes working on all 3 stages of the summoning, the summoned person will be able to use their powers in this world. Vasil sighed and said that he thought he understood exactly what the girl was thinking right now. The demon said that all the evil spirits that were following them now were already connected to this world through the contract with Balzac, so they wouldn't have to go through all 3 stages. He realized that the girl wanted to find out their names and then seize control of the contract. But this plan could only work if a strong wizard was involved, but she only had 2 rings of mana remaining. Vasil asked her a logical question. Did she really believe that she could intercept the contracts of all the evil spirits? The girl shouted that she could do it, but the demon didn't believe it, as he knew that using the Eye of Truth would take a lot of mana from her. Elizabeth, however, insisted on her own. She said she knew where she could get the amount of mana she needed, and that was to use the magic crystal on the bow of the ship. Vasil still didn't share the girl's opinion, as he realized that when she used up all of the crystal's mana, their ship would still fall to the ground, and everyone would die. But then they both remembered that they were being haunted by evil spirits in the form of bats, which meant they could then use their flying skills to survive. At this point, the demon praised the girl for being smart, and she insisted that they go to Michael's place as soon as possible. So Vasil made the little girl fall to the floor. Then he asked if she could find her way to the right place by herself, and when he heard an affirmative answer, he was glad, for he had to look after the enchanted Carmen. In the meantime, Michael was fighting himself against a great number of evil spirits. His strength was running out. But no matter how hard he tried and their numbers didn't get smaller, they surrounded him from all sides and attacked. In front of the man, however, a skull appeared. He said that if the man surrendered, he would allow himself to experience the flames of Taranto, which was a guarantee of a painless death. Michael realized that everything the skull said was a lie, so he said he would have tried harder and said he would have kept him alive. The man summoned fire again, as he decided to hold out as long as he could so that the girl could escape. He had to kill as many evil spirits as possible. He tried to attack the bats, but then he noticed that they had all stopped and were not moving, neither forward nor backward. At that moment, he was hugged by Elizabeth, who said she was very glad he was still alive, and he still had no way of knowing what she was doing here. After that, the girl called out to Vasil, who was not thrilled about having to touch an ordinary wizard himself. After Vasil's touch, the man realized that Elizabeth was an enchantress who possessed the Eye of Truth. But Michael could not believe what he saw in front of him, because he thought the enchantress with the Eye of Truth was only a legend. But the demon turned around and said that they should put the arguments for later. Vasil looked at the enchanted skull and said that he would come to his senses soon. The skull kept repeating that it had discovered a strange anomaly. The evil spirit looked at the girl and repeated that he had discovered an unknown human specimen. The demon kept looking at Elizabeth. He was beginning to realize that this human child was the cause of his malfunction. Michael looked at the demon as well and asked Elizabeth if the plan she had come up with recently and in a hurry would work. Unlike Michael and Vasil, Elizabeth was 100% sure of her abilities and her plan. The mage pondered. He decided to listen to his sixth sense, which had saved him more than once on the battlefield or other dangerous situations. Now he realized that this child could dramatically change their stalemate. Since that was the case, he made the decision to trust the girl, so he hugged her tightly with one arm and told her to hold on to him as tightly as possible. And then he and the girl jumped up together for them to be on top of the magic crystal. The demon couldn't recognize the man's actions and movements, so he asked the mage to stop approaching him, but no one was going to listen to him. But all the man did was accelerate and flew past the talking skeleton at breakneck speed, leaving the man behind him. With a little more effort, Michael landed on the bow of the ship where the magic crystal was. The mage was holding the little girl so she wouldn't fall, so he asked her to be careful. Elizabeth agreed. But as it was, and even here a whole flock of bats were approaching them, the man was already up and waiting for them. To keep the little girl safe and buy her some time, the man again created a magical circle of protection spell that created a dome over them. Michael meanwhile informed her that he wouldn't be able to hold the shield for more than 10 minutes. He said that in that time she should retake control of the contract. The girl said she heard him. Elizabeth crouched down, placed her hands on the crystal, and called out to Vasil. When she called the demon, he appeared upstairs and said that he would help her do it. The girl thanked him in advance. So Vasil crouched beside her and took her hands in his, freezing over the magic crystal. The demon said that he should warn her beforehand about that when he binds her to the crystal. The girl interrupted him sharply and said that she already knew what would happen to her, namely, that she would start losing her life force. But it was a bit more complicated than she said. In order for her to start absorbing the crystal's mana much faster, it had to change her physique for a while. Besides, with her store of life energy, there was only one chance of success. The girl said she realized that. And then Vasil said that he now had a strong desire to improve her brain, but the little girl resolutely refused him. The demon thought that such a rejection was rather rude, but nevertheless he really liked determined babes like her. So Elizabeth, with Vasil's help, began to absorb the magical energy from the crystal, but as it turned out, it was much more painful than the girl thought. Elizabeth realized that too much mana was being poured into her, but the girl thought about the fact that no matter how much it hurt, she would still let it out in a few minutes. At that moment, the girl raised her head up and saw that evil spirits in the form of bats were circling above them. Meanwhile, Elizabeth activated the abilities of her eyes and ordered the evil spirits to fly away from their dome. The bats flew away from them. The magic skull, seeing all this, concluded that this little person was a threat to him, so he ordered his little helpers to stop her. Having received the order, the bats began to attack the protective dome with renewed vigour, Michael holding back their onslaught and maintaining the protective barrier with his last strength. Elizabeth, however, realised that this skull-shaped demon was bound to lose control of the petty evil spirits one more time. She realized that the real Elizabeth Lilly had done something similar many times with demonic opponents. The girl remembered what was written in the book. It said that if her opponent was a demon who had the ability to control other minor evil spirits, the first thing to do was to make the minor minions do their bidding in front of their master. It was bound to hurt his demonic pride, and in the scramble for control, he would make a fatal mistake for himself. And so it was. The skull screamed that the little man's actions were unforgivable. It was at such a moment that the true name of the enemy could be seen. She had just appeared near the skull that was urging the bats to destroy the girl. As it happened, Michael turned to the girl and informed her that he could no longer hold the dome over them. Elizabeth, on the other hand, looked carefully in front of her and realized that she needed a little more time. She gazed into the letters of the demon's true name and only needed to understand the last letter. But the skull ordered the bats to destroy the magic crystal. Therefore, the little evil spirits broke the protective dome and broke through to the mages. What happened was that when all the bats started attacking the magic crystal, the girl staggered, slipped, and started to fall a little. This frightened Vasilius and Michael quite badly, who simultaneously screamed and started running towards her. Michael tried to catch the girl's hand, but he failed, and the skull was already frozen above them. Vasili's face twisted in fear for Elizabeth, who was falling down. The girl, falling down, realized that what she needed now was a magic item with a large crystal. And so she fumbled for the dagger with the crystal Asheloth had given her. Elizabeth realized that this red crystal was enough to accomplish what she had planned. So she confidently called out the skull's true name, which was Skula. It worked, so the girl ordered the skull to go to her and save her from dying from the fall. At that moment, the magic skull commanded his little minions, and they flew down and formed themselves into the shape of a large bird, which picked it up. The girl almost cried from joy. Tears came to the corners of her eyes as she realized that she had succeeded. At that moment, the skull appeared behind the girl's back and asked her to say her full name, then called out her name once more and once more. Elizabeth still didn't understand what the demon wanted from her, and the demon demanded her full name again. But then he noticed that they didn't have an understanding, so he started asking her for her name again. Now she had already realized what the skull wanted from her, so she said her name was Elizabeth Lilly. The demon said he was pleased to meet her, Elizabeth Lilly. He now recognized the girl as his new contractor. Skull reported that he had successfully completed his first assignment, so he needed a new instruction from her, but she didn't quite understand it. Skull noticed that the girl had poor language skills in her opinion, but he was going to remedy that. Skull began customizing a new way of using language vocabulary. Elizabeth, on the other hand, realized that she was fine. She thought it was the demon that was talking strangely. Skull, on the other hand, proceeded to demand a new instruction from the girl. Since he had understood the first instruction and executed it, now he needed a new one. Elizabeth looked at the demon and thought about what he was saying, but first she wanted to go upstairs. The girl, however, looked at the ship. She realized that the ship would not last long in the sky and would soon fall because she had taken all the mana from the magic crystal. She realized that very soon the ship would fall and shatter into little slivers. So the girl ordered Skula to make sure that the ship did not fall to the ground. And Skull said that this order was very unreasonable, so the demon offered to take her to a safe place. But the girl refused and said that she must save the ship. But Skula tried to prove to her that his servants would not be able to hold the ship because its weight was too much for them. Elizabeth didn't want to admit defeat, so she stuck her fingers into the skull's eye sockets with her fingers, and the man started screaming that it wasn't fair to use physical violence on him. And then she started twirling the demon from side to side, even though he kept saying that he had already informed her of the impossibility of following that order. But the girl was sure that she believed the demon would succeed, but he continued to stand his ground. The girl was sure that her idea would be successful, for she would take one half of it, and the demon would take the other half. Then she swung the skull like a ball, preparing to send it flying in the direction she wanted it to go. But the protagonist did not listen to a new batch of bickering, and threw the demon in the direction of the ship, saying that they will definitely succeed. Meanwhile, the little girl had given orders to the rest of the evil spirits. It was for them to get her to the ship immediately. The big bird carried her upward. When she was level with the ship, Elizabeth called out to Michael. He turned around at the familiar child's voice and saw the girl in front of him. He was happy that she was perfectly fine. The girl, however, decided to go down to the deck of the ship, so she asked the man to catch her. So she jumped down from the improvised bird into Mikhail's arms. Vasil swam up to them and said that he was very happy to see her safe and sound. The man couldn't believe his eyes, so he asked her if it was true that she had managed to rewrite the contract. The little girl smiled and said that yes, she had succeeded. The girl said that wasn't the most important thing right now. They needed to get back aboard the ship immediately. But here, Michael was still torturing hope that the lifeboats would work, so he suggested running to them immediately. The girl, unlike the man, had no false hopes, as she had taken all the mana from the magic crystal that had kept the ship in the air until now, so the lifeboat wouldn't be able to take off either. So she tried to convince the man that she knew a way to make sure the ship didn't hit the ground. Michael didn't understand how she could do that, but then he sighed and only wondered what plan had been born in her head. So she began to outline her plan. First, they needed to put the ship into emergency landing mode so they could keep it flying all the way to the ground. But the problem was that there was no mana left in the magic crystal, and it was practically empty now. The girl said they could do it without mana, since she had made a contract with a demon just a few minutes ago, and it worked out. Michael smiled and said he had no choice but to trust her on this matter as well. The mage realized that first they needed to find someone aboard the ship who could operate this particular ship. From downstairs, Carmen began to talk about how things were going from bad to worse. Carmen shouted to his boss that the girl he had entrusted to him earlier had disappeared. The sailor next to him was shaking with fear and pointing his finger at something. But the girl hadn't disappeared anywhere and was standing next to Michael, so Carmen looked rather puzzled and surprised. Meanwhile, the sailor started yelling at the new acquaintance because they went outside and the girl was fine. He was angry that he fell for it because his fiancée was waiting for him at home. The sailor looked at the man with the girl in his arms and said that since they were all okay, so it was time for them all to make a leg out of that falling ship. And so Michael was already standing in front of the sailor, asking him if he knew how to fly flying ships. The kid was yelling about how he was just an ordinary civilian who had brought the ship through the portal, and so now he wanted to get away from here, not fly the thing again. But Mikhail said something about putting the ship into emergency landing mode. The young man didn't want to do it all. He stubbed his toes and arms, but the general was already pulling him by the hand into the navigator's room. The sailor was practically crying and begging his fiancée for forgiveness. He felt like he couldn't go home to her this time. So, the ship was rapidly approaching the Earth. Bats helped him not to collapse on the surface of our planet like a sack of potatoes. The sailor tried with all his might to hold the ship's helm. He was covered in sweat from the effort. The girl also began to do her part of the work. She complimented Squall on how well he was doing on her errand. She asked the demon to continue to keep the ship in the air, and she was going to make it take off. The demon himself marveled at what he saw, as the girl's control skills surpassed his own abilities. But he continued to not understand how such a thing could be done by a little human girl. The girl, however, realized that such a thing was possible because she was none other than Elizabeth Lilly. The bats, the evil spirits, supported the flying ship with all the sins, although they also gave it quite a hard time. And suddenly the sailor, who was holding the helm in his hands, noticed that the ship stopped falling and slowed down. So he began to realize that what was left was to land it on the ground. Elizabeth rejoiced, as it meant that she and the evil spirits and the demon only had a little longer to last. But here was the problem. The girl's life force began to leave her body and she staggered. Vasil cried out in alarm. The demon held her by the shoulders and asked her to let the ship go, since she had helped them so much. Besides, everyone was supposed to survive except those who would fall overboard by mistake. But the little girl said she wasn't going to do that. This seemed very funny to Vasil, as all the talented children were very stubborn. But the demon decided to help the girl. He exhaled heavily and said he had no other choice. Vasil began to conjure. He decided to take all of the girl's pain away, as she wouldn't have survived the rest of the ship's landing otherwise. The girl thanked him for such a favor. Vasil held the girl in his arms and said that he didn't understand how she had managed to do such a thing at such a young age. The girl didn't understand how she'd managed to do it, to make a contract with a demon. Only now she wondered if it was even possible to use her powers so recklessly. for it was strictly forbidden by the Great Treaty to intercept contracts from others. So now she made a request to Vasile. The demon replied that he would do his best for her. The girl voiced the obvious things, namely that she had made a contract with Skula, so she asked the demon not to tell Ashlot about it. The demon couldn't believe his ears, and the girl was already continuing her thought. She said that she and he didn't want any more trouble, so Ashlot didn't need to know about what she'd done. Meanwhile, the girl was starting to close her eyes. The men next to her said they were already landing. Vasile started yelling and talking to the girl, who didn't respond at all to the demon's questions about how she was feeling and what was happening to her now. The girl didn't realize what was happening. She was in total darkness, which was lit by beautiful warm lights. She thought that maybe it was Skula and the bats. The little girl noticed the thread that connected her to Skula. It was proof that she had made a contract with the skull through his true name. Elizabeth was puzzled that she knew all this in such minute detail. It made her feel very strange. But at some point, the girl saw something that besides the beautiful golden warm dots were also red spots. This only meant that the contract with Skula's previous owner had not been broken, so she reached out her hand to the red thread. The girl realized that something like this could confuse the demon, and it wouldn't be able to figure out which of the owners was the real one, so she thought it was worth cutting the stranger's thread of the contract. But it was the biggest mistake the girl could have ever made. Suddenly, in that space, she heard the voice of the elder lich saying that he recognized her as the child that Ashloth had saved, and the girl had already begun to fall deeper into the abyss. Elizabeth realized that Balzac had most likely sensed her beginning to act on the contract between him and Skula, which was why Elder Lich was able to get into her mind. At this moment, Elder Lich appeared in front of the girl, still holding his own skull in his hand. The beast didn't understand how an ordinary human little girl had managed to intercept his contract. Meanwhile, Balzac voiced his version of the answer, namely that she was an enchantress who possessed the talent of the Eye of Truth. Balzac hovered over the girl and spoke of how it was now clear to him why Ashalot Vane had appeared in these lands. The skeleton began to reach out his bony hand towards the girl and was practically touching her already, saying that if he subdued the mage with the Eye of Truth, Ashaloth Vane would no longer be able to stop him. At first, the girl made feeble attempts to stop the monster, but then confidently told him not to dare touch her consciousness with his drugged paws. At first, she was frightened by her thoughts, but then she calmed down and told herself that she was Elizabeth Lilly, a brilliant sorceress and mistress of her own destiny. But Balzac also began to realize that her brain was not working like that of an ordinary 5-year-old child, and then a very unusual hunch struck him. But at that moment, Ashaloth came back into play and told Elder Lich not to take his eyes off of him unless he wanted to truly die. Balzac didn't expect the mage to be able to get into his mind, so he asked him how he was able to do it. The guardian of the Great Treaty did not bother to answer his opponent's question, but simply said that it would be over when he blew the place up, and without looking into it, the man began to do what he had promised. But he didn't know that if he continued in this way, he might be able to touch Elizabeth's mind as well. The little girl started to call for help, and at that moment she was grabbed by the hand of a shadow of a girl like herself. The girl looked intently at the shadow of another little girl in front of her and asked her who she was. But her interlocutor only pressed her finger to her lips and said that it was not yet time for them to meet. Suddenly, the girl began to realize that the stranger's voice was the same as before. It was her who talked to her all the time, and the strangest thing was that it was similar to her own. Yet she wondered if it was really her own voice. If you thought about it, she wasn't the one who'd said those words. They were coming from somewhere in the back of her mind. The shadow repeated that the time had not yet come for their full acquaintance. Then the stranger's shadow began to fade, telling her that she needed to temper her curiosity, for there was no need for her to know the truth for now. And then she said a strange thing about how there was no reason for excitement, as she only had one chance left. For some reason, the girl thought she saw a book and pages flying at her, and then she asked the shadow what it meant about the last chance. And then Elizabeth felt as if she had been transported somewhere. A ship was sailing across the sea toward a tall black lighthouse. On the deck stood a girl, a child, and a man. That girl was the grown-up Elizabeth Lilly who was looking in front of her. The beautiful enchantress flinched and looked at her hand, not realizing what had just happened. The girl didn't understand why her body had gotten so big, because just a moment ago, she was just a little girl who was 10 years old. But now Elizabeth realized one thing. She was not 10 years old. she was over 100 years old. She didn't understand why she had begun to think of herself as a little child. She was now aboard a Continental Union warship and began to think about who she really was. The girl realized with clarity that she was Elizabeth Lilly, the brilliant enchantress, the lord of the 7 demons, the heroine who defeated the dragon. And she was also the ruler of Alpenia and the head of the Continental Union of Wulfa. However, the girl was afraid to engage in battle with the man who lived just in that black tower, even despite all his regalia. At that moment, the enchantress was called out by a small dark-haired boy who was also aboard the ship. But this was no ordinary child. It was Elizabeth's conscript, Lucifer, the rider of dawn. He smiled and asked the girl if she had already changed her mind about joining the battle. Elizabeth looked at her demon over her shoulder and said that no, she hadn't changed her mind about doing this. But the girl realized that there was nowhere to retreat, and it was too late. They were already at the storm tower itself, which was covered with magic circles. Elizabeth knew this special place was the last stronghold of humanity, the castle of Anastasia's first mage. There was a time when she wished she were on top of this place. The sorceress ordered her hand Lucifer to destroy all the protective barriers of the place. The demon happily ran to fulfill this assignment. The demon began to take its true form. It had black wings. It created magical circles and started jumping down, attacking the protective barrier. As a result of this attack, a crack appeared in the protective barrier, and Lucifer was already extending his hand to the girl, thus inviting her to go inside. But lo and behold, it happened that she did not take his hand, but passed by the demon boy and asked Enoch to be on guard. There was a man standing behind the girl's back. He looked at her and asked about them, and if they were really going to go to this castle. Elizabeth, on the other hand, reacted quite interestingly. She smiled at him and told him that did he really want her to go there all alone? The man, on the other hand, though he didn't like the idea, since she had decided to go for it, it was his duty to follow her anyway. Elizabeth turned away from him and ordered him to follow her inside. Enoch covered his eyes and decided to follow the girl. They had a goal, to save the man who lived in this black and well-protected castle. At that moment, several huge stone golems appeared in front of Enoch and separated him from the enchantress. But since that was the case, the man channeled magical energy into his spear and gathered to attack the golems that got in his way. The man with one clear and quick signal struck with his magical spear, which piled stones onto the deck of the ship. Enoch picked up on the fact that there were too many golems here. He was standing back to back with Elizabeth. The girl picked up on the fact that the problem was that these were not evil spirits, over whom she would have easily been able to hijack the contract. The situation was not easy, so she called Azazel, called the Breath of Life, to help her. The demon told her to go ahead, and he would catch up with her later. At that moment, the girl and the man ran forward while Azazel was left to fight the golems. Elizabeth ran as hard as she could up the stairs, hoping they still had time to save that one man. The girl realized that she only had a little bit left to get to her goal. She clenched her fist and channeled her mana and created a magic circle on it in order to break the wall. Her blow was very strong, as not only a small hole appeared, but the entire wall collapsed in front of her. The girl stood in the opening and breathed heavily. In the room behind the wall, a huge purple magic circle was drawn on the floor. Inside the circle lay a dead girl, and a man stood next to her. Elizabeth squinted and called out the name of the man in front of her. It was Ashalot. The wizard turned to her slightly, smiled, and said that Elizabeth was late this time. So on the floor of the castle, in the magic circle lay the corpse of a red-haired sorceress, the first to have the Eye of Truth, Anastasia Axiom. It was this woman who once led the human race to victory in the Great War against demons and evil spirits 300 years ago. Anastasia then set up a protective barrier on top of the storm tower to keep humanity safe from the invasion of the unclean, whose power surpasses that of the supreme demons. Asheloth looked at Elizabeth and said that not all people liked Anastasia. But even so, demons and evil spirits were inherent in the universe's demons and evil spirits, with great power and a thirst for destruction. Elizabeth ran up to the man and rebuked him, because he had promised to give her at least one chance, promised to wait for him. But Ashelot stood at the edge of his magic circle and said that he couldn't wait any longer. The wizard said with a smirk that destroying the protective barrier over the castle had been their cherished dream for more than 100 years. But Elizabeth said she wasn't talking to the person who was answering her right now, so she asked them to be quiet. The girl remembered that once evil spirits and demons had found a way to accomplish their goal. So right now she was asking the man across the street if he was going to hide behind the dragon for much longer. Demons and evil spirits, however, merged into one powerful being, a demon colonizer called the dragon. So now in front of her was not the Ashelot Vane who had saved her, but a shell of him, and Elizabeth asked the man to come to his senses and wake up. Unlike other demons, the dragon is a special entity that can absorb weaker fowls through touch. So, the more time passed, the more the dragon absorbed entities and became invisibly stronger, until Elizabeth managed to seal it away after a fierce battle. However, it happened that one of the supreme demons who had a contract with Anastasia broke the seal on the dragon. And now Elizabeth was standing in front of Ashelot, whom she did not know, and he was asking her if she meant what she said and asked him to do. He said, all the entities that the dragon had absorbed in all this time had become one with him. The dragon in the mage's body reached out for the girl's earring. He wondered if she really thought that the person he was locked inside would be able to keep his consciousness forever. The dragon lips of Asheloth said it was time for her to forget her fruitless dreams, and bid her to silently watch the demons and evil spirits grow closer to her cherished dream with each step. At that moment, the girl asked the man a question, obviously not on the subject of the conversation. She was wondering how long he was going to continue groping her with his bloody hands. The demon was amused by this, but he realized that although it was a nice try, it was quite naive. The dragon looked into Elizabeth's eyes and wondered if she still had hope that Asheloth Vane was alive. And Dragon continued to be amused, saying that he realizes that love is that human feeling that makes people do stupid things and believe in things that aren't really there. At that moment, something strange began to happen. In Ashelot's head, whose body was possessed by the dragon, there was a breakdown and resonance. The dragon clutched his head and began to repeat that this could not be, that it was just his imagination, because he could not believe that a pathetic half-breed could be capable of something like this. The girl watched everything that was happening with all her eyes. She asked the man across from her only one question. Was it not him now in front of her? Blood protruded from the corner of the man's lips, but he said confidently that he was an Asheloth, not a dragon. Then she interrogated him a few more times, and after the last one she slapped the man hard across the face. Ashelot, on the other hand, spoke to her in a familiar manner, and said that with such a small hand she should have slapped him. Since he wanted it so badly and was asking for it, the girl didn't hesitate to hit him one more time. Ashelot was already rubbing his slapped cheek, saying that the second slap was many times harder and hurt more than the first. The dragon that was released from captivity absorbed the crystal of the supreme demon and turned the world into hell in a matter of seconds. Meanwhile, Elizabeth also complained not that she was after 2 strokes. She couldn't feel her arm. She kept screaming the girl didn't understand why he lied to her and didn't give her one last chance like he promised before. He said he could last another 100 years. Just when the world was in chaos, Anastasia went to extreme measures, and Elizabeth continued to reproach the man for not giving her the opportunity to find another way out of the situation. The first mistress of the Eye of Truth imprisoned the dragon inside her apprentice, Asheloth Vane, to buy herself some time and patch up the holes in the protective barrier, then send all demons of equal strength to the Supreme back to the underworld. But for the success of the operation, Anastasia sacrificed herself. Even if Asheloth dies after her mentor, Elizabeth, the sorceress with the Eye of Truth, can become the guardian of the protective barrier and keep humanity safe. All the mages in the world agreed with Anastasia's decision, but Elizabeth herself didn't want their story to have that ending. The girl did not understand why it was Asheloth who was to be the vessel for the dragon, why it was he who had been chosen to be banished from this world. But here he was, already starting to turn away from the girl and talk about how things would no longer happen to him, but to what would be inside of him. The man confessed that if he stepped into the underworld, his consciousness would immediately be erased. In other words, he would die. But Elizabeth didn't believe he was happy with this development. Was he really content with a life where even after death he was decided to be used just because he was a half-demon? The mage, however, touched her cheek one last time and told her that the process of erasing her consciousness had accelerated. He realized that he would only last a year at most because of it, so he decided to end it while he was still Asheloth Vane. Anastasia agreed with that as well. Elizabeth tried to prove to him that they still had a whole year ahead of them. But Asheloth objected. He said that his consciousness was already almost wiped out as it was, as he had waged an internal battle with the dragon to come to her here, and then to improve the protective barrier. He stroked her cheek, telling her that she was too naive to think she could save everyone. But the magician was wrong, as the girl did not want to save all of humanity, but only him alone. She agreed only that she naively assumed he would hear and obey her, but she was wrong about that. Asheloth rounded his eyes, realizing that the girl was up to something. Meanwhile, the girl had already conjured a magic circle over their heads. With this spell, she was going to rewrite this world and their history all over again. Asheloth was in complete shock as he didn't understand why she was doing this. After all, she was one of the guardians of this world. But the point and the answer was simple. She had never asked anyone for it. No one had asked her opinion on it. She knew, for she had never once in her life said she wanted to be a guardian of this world, and Anastasia's successor. She had never even had that thought, not even once. The girl confessed that she had always wanted to become much stronger and escape from her tormentors, as she dreamed of being free. Yes, she became strong. Yes, she became powerful. But her childhood dream never came true. She never became free. And the fault was the grievous sins she had taken on her soul to get this far. That's why the girl dreamed of paying the bills and thus find freedom, so that then with a clear conscience to establish a relationship, which did not go well from the beginning. But things didn't work out the way she wanted, and they found themselves at a point in the here and now. But a great desire to save Asheloth blossomed in her soul. The man didn't understand why she was doing this, why she wanted to turn back time, because history would repeat itself again. Elizabeth understood the risk, but what if she remembered everything? The man didn't realize what she was saying, because with magic of this type, people don't have memories of their lives. And how she would achieve the desired result was not the man's concern, it was hers. At that moment, a dirty and slightly wrinkled Enoch entered the room. He said that he and the mage hadn't seen each other in a while. The man admitted that there were quite a few golems, and they had only finished dealing with them now. Asheloth couldn't believe that his former friend was involved in all this madness as well. Meanwhile, Enoch Silas approached Elizabeth and reminded Asheloth that he had a special memory transfer ability. So Enoch Silas possessed one of the rarest magical gifts, which could only be used by members of the imperial royal family, but a person could only use it once in his life. With this gift, each emperor passed on to his successor all his knowledge of ruling the empire. Asheloth was well aware of this, so he reasoned that if Enoch used his gift right now, he would not be able to pass on to his heirs the wisdom accumulated over centuries. But the heir to the throne only smiled. He said that of course he was a little sorry, but he believed that every heir and ruler should become worthy, relying on his own strength. Enoch informed him that when Elizabeth begins to rewrite history, for a moment the past and the future will intersect. It was then that he would intercept that moment and give her his memories. His memory would pass to Elizabeth from the past. Asheloth wasn't sure of his friend's success, as he knew it would be impossible to pull something like this off in a few seconds. But Enoch was confident in his abilities. The man compressed all his memories and gave them the form of a book and text, so that only the most important and necessary things would reach the girl from the past. And this object he held out to the now adult Elizabeth, and talked about how his memory was now no more than an ordinary book with no pictures. Enoch had already shown this book to the enchantress before this event. He had even thought of a title for it and called it The Wolfer Story. For some reason, Asheloth was angry and called his friend a crazy person. The magician thought that the heir to the empire had gone mad, but the latter objected and said that the reason for his action was love. After saying that, Asheloth asked the girl what she would do, or how she planned to prevent the High Demon from betraying her in case she did turn back time. The girl hesitated and said that it might not be possible to do so. Elizabeth realized that she was being too stupid, but regardless, she decided to try and change the end of their story. After all, she's Elizabeth Lilly, and she knew there would be no reward for her heroism at the end of the journey. The man tried to stop the girl, but she didn't listen to him and began to conjure. She understood well that her special attitude towards him and his towards her always had and always will have different reasons. Elizabeth looked at Asheloth and realized that from the very beginning, from their very first meeting, everything had gone wrong. Besides, the girl realized that even when she went back in time, she would most likely act the same way she did before. But at the moment of sorcery, something interesting and unexpected happened. Someone grabbed the girl's hand. It was a black and red shadow. The girl didn't understand how it happened, but here she realized it was the dragon. The dragon they sealed said he sensed the sorceress's desperation. The demon continued to tell the girl that he had heard her true thoughts, hopes, and desires. The demon tried to persuade Elizabeth to take an extremely rash and foolish step, namely to make a contract with him, because only in this way her desire could become real. But the sorceress resisted his sweet speeches. But the dragon was sure that it was she who would go to all his tricks and conditions, just to realize what he had planned. But at the most interesting point, when the demon was ready to name the demon who had betrayed Elizabeth and Ashalot, she woke up. The little girl thought she was dreaming about Ashloth, but the problem was that she had little recollection of the events of her dream. All the events of the past days seemed unreal to her. She wondered what this room was and where it was. And then a white animal crawled up to the girl and asked her how the awakening had gone and whether her consciousness had been restored. The little girl recognized the reptile as School by its strange manner of speech. Skull took the form of a white cat and came and sat on her bed and reported that he had no deviations from his essence. But the girl was surprised. She didn't understand when the demon had time to turn into a cat. She didn't understand how the demon had managed to turn into a cat, but Skull had said he had the skill of body capture because disguise was necessary for survival. Squall explained that the skull shape had suited the preferences of his previous contractor, so when he had a new contract, he had to find a shape that would be more to the girl's liking. Elizabeth, however, realized that the demon had clearly made a good guess with the kitty's appearance. But the girl still had one question: where she was. At that moment, the door to her room opened and a woman looked in, glad to see her awake. The woman had already begun to approach the bed, where Elizabeth had been sleeping a moment earlier. The stranger realized that the girl was probably surprised to wake up in a completely unfamiliar place. Meanwhile, the little girl ignored the question about her medical condition, squeezed the blanket and asked where she was. The woman said the girl was in Erigalda and asked if the little girl knew what kind of town it was. Elizabeth replied that it was a city of magicians, and she would be tried here. The child's last words surprised and frightened the hitherto sweet stranger. Elizabeth, however, did not understand her reaction, but it was now becoming clear to her that the man before her was not the demon Ashaloth had summoned, but a very ordinary man. The girl continued to clutch the blanket and asked where Vasil and Ashalot were now, the latter promising to return to her in a week. Meanwhile, the woman sat down on the edge of the bed next to the little girl and asked the latter to relax a little, as she was too tense, and also asked for permission to call her by her name. The woman introduced herself. Her name was Suzanne, and she only allowed me to call her by her first name. Suzanne said it was the home of her father, whose name was Ethan, and who worked as the vice president of unification. She remembered that when they were about to board the ship, Vasil had asked Ashalot to contact Ethan, but the mage didn't really want to report back and explain anything to the man who bore a resemblance to a raccoon. The demon told the girl that Ashaloth was friends with Ethan almost as much as with him. But the wizard himself did not understand who told Vasil that they were friends. Elizabeth suddenly remembered that Vasil had served as president of this very mages association, but she'd only mentioned that Ashalot had mentioned Ethan in conversation. Suzanne was suddenly curious about how the magician had described her father. The girl said her saviour had said Ethan looked like a raccoon. At first, the woman tried to hide her smile, but then she laughed and said that her father had a certain resemblance to the animal. Suzanne said that there was some trouble in the Mages Association, so her father took the girl into his care for a while. Elizabeth wanted to know right now what the problem was, but the woman said that a little later, her father would come and tell the girl everything. The girl was upset. She didn't understand why Ashaloth and Vasil had given her to their acquaintance. She speculated that they might have gotten in trouble because she had stolen Skula from Elder Leech. The woman noticed the girl's reaction and apologized for not being able to tell her more, as she was not a wizard and her father had not initiated her into the affairs of the unification. Elizabeth tried to apologize to Suzanne, but the woman interrupted her and said that the girl's reaction was understandable, as she woke up in a completely unfamiliar place. It turned out that Elizabeth hadn't come to her senses for a week, and all that time Suzanne had been looking after her, and she was very worried about the child. The little girl was surprised, as she hadn't thought that spell was that difficult. The girl asked her new acquaintance if the other people who had been on the ship with her had been saved. Suzanne thought for a moment, and then said that if she remembered correctly, everyone was fine. Elizabeth breathed a sigh of relief, as she realized she had done the right thing and saved everyone, without exception. At this point, Skula woke up and started yelling for the old man to make the correct description. Meanwhile, Skula climbed on Elizabeth's head in the form of a cat. The girl was indignant because the cat was heavy, and her new acquaintance was surprised because it was the first time she had seen a talking cat. The demon was angry and said that many people who were on the ship, near the girl, later found themselves in serious condition. Kisa was already starting to scratch the girl, saying that the people on the ship had been attacked by an evil wizard, and many of them were badly hurt. Squall once again surprised the girl when he called Elder Lich a good wizard, since he didn't hurt Elizabeth when he had the chance to. The girl then asked the cat who was the bad wizard. The cat looked at her and said that the people on the ship called him Ashalot Vane. Elizabeth was outraged by this and began to deny it, as it seemed that the demon was most likely mistaken. The demon took offence and started clawing at the girl, demanding an apology since he was and is fine with his eyesight. But Elizabeth refused to believe it, and said that Ashalot would not hurt people, and Skula took it personally and thought the girl wanted to mortally insult him, even though she tried to prove to him that he had misunderstood her. At this point, Suzanne took the cat in her arms and said they would chat later, but now it was time for something to eat. Then the woman got up and put Squall on the bed and told the girl to stop apologising so often. After all, she was their guest. So the woman beckoned the girl to follow her. They were in another room, and Suzanne put a cup of tea in front of the little girl. Elizabeth noticed that one of the maids in Mr. Ethan's house was a demon, so she secretly asked Susanna if she knew about it. The woman was surprised that the girl was able to find a demon with just a glance. The landlady admitted that she had heard that demons worked in the house, but she didn't know who they were. Elizabeth, on the other hand, didn't understand why they did it. Meanwhile, a handsome man entered the room. He said that this mansion belonged to him, plus he was a summoner, so demons worked in this house. Ethan took off his cloak, sat down at the table and drank tea with a calm and perfect look. The girl was surprised that it was Susanna's father, as this character did not appear in the book. But that was the least of the girl's concern. So she asked him what had happened to Ashaloth, how his battle with the Elder Lich had ended. The master of the house put a cup of tea on the table and said that the magician was all right. But Balzac had lost his bodily form, so it could be said that he was dead, and his workshop was now in ruins. But then he stopped talking and swallowed, for there was a moment he had chosen to keep silent about. The following happened. 3 days after the ship wrecked, soldiers from the Imperial Army of Alpenia arrived at the crash site. But they didn't care about the people who survived. They only cared about the weapon Flame of Taranto, which was being transported on the ship. Mikhail was not in the best shape and tried to explain everything to his arriving colleagues. But they didn't really listen to him and went about their business. They didn't even pay attention to Elizabeth, who was very badly hurt saving the ship. So Vasil took her in his arms and tried to flee the wreck. It was at this moment that Ashaloth Vane returned from his battle with Elder Lich and blocked his demon's path. The wizard finished with Balzac much faster than he had hoped, so he went straight back to the girl, except she was in a very poor state again. This really pissed him off and made him angry, so he started attacking all the soldiers indiscriminately. It was only thanks to Vasil that a bloodbath was avoided. Even so, most of the soldiers were either injured or killed. The man realized that he could not tell the child that, so he only apologized for such unexpected news. Nevertheless, in 12 hours, Ashalot Vane had a court duel to attend, so he asked the little girl if she would mind being a witness to it. Elizabeth asked her if she would be willing to be a witness in it, but she only queried what a court duel was and what her saviour had to do with it. Ethan looked at the girl and thought about how to explain to her more simply what a magical duel was. So to begin with, he said that it was a tradition that all wizards of this world followed. Then he said that when a man commits a crime, he is usually punished by his own people. But when it comes to magicians, the situation is much more complicated. The situation becomes confused when a top-notch wizard who is related to one of the nations is brought to trial. Even if the magician falls under the jurisdiction of a certain state, it is still problematic to try elite sorcerers who can destroy an entire army in the blink of an eye. Therefore, it was decided that wizards would sort out disputes between wizards, and when words are powerless, then brute force is used. Thus was born the judicial duel. Such information was beginning to alarm Elizabeth slightly, so she asked the landlord how such events were usually conducted. Ethan said that there were no strict and rigid rules for these duels. The mages had to fight one-on-one in front of the public, and that was it. And the girl just had to go there and watch the fight. She still didn't understand one thing, though: why Ashlot needed to fight someone. The fact was that she, Elizabeth, was the subject of the dispute, and this was what shocked the child. Ethan reminded her that Ashaloth had destroyed not only Elder Lich, but his entire workshop. After that, the Holland government had demanded that he give it to them as compensation for moral and material damage. The mage didn't like that suggestion, so he didn't hesitate to blow the head off the negotiator. Good thing he was one of Lich's men and didn't die. Elizabeth still didn't understand why the Holland government needed her. Did they really resent her so much for stealing a demon from one of the Lich elders? That wasn't entirely true. According to the vice president of the Mages Association, Holland appreciated her giftedness, which was why they wanted to get their hands on her. After all, when you think about it, she didn't just steal a demon from a powerful opponent, she also makes it stay by her side all this time, and that only spoke to the fact that she had a high level of skill. The girl was almost crying. She didn't understand why people were starting to decide for her. She didn't want to go to Holland. Ethan noted that the little girl was in a precarious position, since she herself was under investigation for violating one of the rules of the Great Treaty. The other side used Balzac's death to justify the legitimacy of their requests and demands. Elizabeth didn't understand why criminals weren't allowed to decide where they wanted to serve their sentence. The man said that wizards should live according to the laws of wizards. Suddenly, the little girl realized that Ashlot had decided on this duel to protect her in this way. The man was pleased at how quickly the girl understood what was involved, so now he wanted an answer to his previous question: whether she agreed to attend the duel as a witness. Elizabeth clarified one point: it might have helped Ashlot. The master of the house said that it would make life very easy for everyone involved. Since that was the case, she gave her consent and decided to be a witness in the court duel. Ethan said it was a wise decision, and they needed to hit the road right away. But before leaving, Susanna led the girl to a large room that was filled with different outfits. The girl didn't understand why they had come there, as they were going to a court duel, not a ball. But the woman said that even for such an event, it was necessary to dress up. The girl objected and said that she had clothes, to which the woman said that Elizabeth had only travelling clothes, and that the rules of etiquette required her to wear ceremonial clothes for a court duel. At that moment, little Elizabeth remembered that Elizabeth from the book always wore pretty dresses when she needed to go out. The girl realised that the court duel was also an important event, so she accepted the help of Suzanne, who had already started going through her things to pick the little girl's outfit. The woman said that they had a lot of stuff here that they had stocked up on when they found out about her baby girl. Elizabeth turned around and asked the woman if she had a daughter. Suzanne froze and then said that she had a daughter, but not to worry about her feelings as too much time had passed since then. Then she looked at the girl and said that she was over 100 years old, and it was all the result of magic. So the woman found one pretty dress already and asked the girl to try it on. The first dress was a long 2-colour floral dress. It came with a strange and large headdress. But the green one with the hairband and shoes to match sat on the girl 100 times better than the first one and fit her perfectly. At that moment, Ethan peeked into the room and asked if Elizabeth was ready to go. Suzanne was indignant, saying that her father was no gentleman, and then added that they had just finished. The girl thanked her new acquaintance, and the latter said that thanks to the girl, she also had fun from the heart. So, now that all preparations were complete, the man held out his hand to Miss Lily and asked her to ride with him to the judicial duel. The man and the girl set off on their journey. They sat opposite each other in the carriage. The little girl was very nervous. To calm her down a bit, he suggested she look out the carriage window, for it was quite a long drive to the court arena. But the girl said she'd be patient until they got to the right place. And Ethan concluded that she was nothing like the other Eye of Truth wielders. In all these years, there had only been 5 mages, including her, who had possessed the Eye of Truth, and the man had had the honour of being introduced to each of them. They all had different personalities, but there was something they all had in common. None of them could resist something interesting and unknown. It was always difficult for them to curb their curiosity. And it was written in the book that when Elizabeth met something very interesting on her way, she could not take her eyes off it. The girl suddenly realized that the reason for this was her gift. Elizabeth thought she was weird, but Ethan objected. He said it was even a good thing, since curiosity sometimes had dire consequences. Namely, it always ended badly, as the mages with the Eye of Truth before her, due to their curiosity that they couldn't stop, would reach for the demonic essence. Suddenly the girl wondered what other wizards with a gift like hers were doing. The man said that 3 of them are dead, and Anastasia is the head of the Axiom School of Magic. This surprised the girl quite a bit, but they had already arrived at the arena, and the man didn't want to continue talking about the topic. They stepped out of the carriage and stood in front of the magician's court arena. It seemed very large to the little girl. No, huge. Ethan looked at the girl and said they needed to walk, and apologized for that. And she didn't understand why he was apologizing for something like that. The man had a different opinion, believing that if they had arrived on time, they would not have had to go at all. They should have arrived before the protective barrier was erected, but they were late because of his negligence of time. Elizabeth was embarrassed, as she thought it was because she had taken too long to dress up. The man said that the time spent getting ready didn't count, so one day he would repay her that debt. And that's what he was used to doing, paying back debts. He was used to paying back debts in a big way, so he considered the girl very lucky. So they went inside. The crowd was already shouting, betting on the mage in whom each of the observers was sure. It was the first time Elizabeth had seen this kind of human behaviour, so she clarified what was going on here. Ethan said that this town had legalised gambling, so people were now placing their bets. The girl, on the other hand, had not expected such a thing, so she was a little annoyed and angry that such people existed in this country. What they don't realise is that now Ashlot will risk his life to save the girl from certain death or worse in Holland. And so they came to a door that led to a special room. Elizabeth thought that as soon as she saw Ashlot, she would thank him for everything he was doing for her. And she thanked Ethan now for giving him the opportunity to be a witness in a court duel. She was confident that she would definitely be able to help her saviour and the Mages Association as a whole. Ethan was very pleased by these words from the girl, and he smiled, taking a step towards the door. The moment Elizabeth entered the room, Vasil ran up to her, hugged her and told her that he missed her very much. The girl didn't understand how it happened that the demon was no longer a ghost and could pick her up and touch her so calmly. The demon twirled the girl in the air and said that she was too cute dressed up, and it was illegal to be so cute at all, and then happily noticed that she had regained another ring of mana, and the little girl asked him to let her go, as his actions made her dizzy. Meanwhile, a woman approached the company and thanked Ethan for managing to bring the girl to the court duel. The man said he hadn't done anything special, and introduced the child. So the man introduced the girl to a woman. It was Hestia Miller. The woman said she was pleased to meet the young sorceress who possessed the Eye of Truth. Hestia realized that it was hard to call her a very ordinary person. She realized that if it had been anyone else, they wouldn't have noticed her peculiarities, but the mage with the Eye of Truth had to. The woman wondered how this special child would react to what she saw. Would she cry or hide behind Ethan? But the girl just stared at her. Elizabeth introduced herself and came quite close to the mage to ask in a whisper about the designs on her body. She wondered if they had magical properties. The woman and child met eyes, and the girl said that she thought Hestia had something of the demon. At this, Hestia gestured to keep quiet about it, and thought to herself that she liked this girl and had passed her test. Here the man who was taking the judge's seat said that since the last witness was already in the court arena, they could begin the hearing on Ashlot Vane's case. So he asked everyone but the witnesses to leave this room. Vasil bent down to the girl and said that he and Ethan were not taken as witnesses. So now they had to retire to the special spectators box, and as soon as she finished her business here, she would have to run there to them. Hestia rebuked the demon for misbehaving in front of the people from Elbana, because they might think that they had bribed the judge and the girl would stay with them anyway. But he objected, saying that Elizabeth had already agreed to join the Magicians' Union. The altercation was stopped by Ethan, who banged his cane on the floor and told the president that it was time to stop acting like this. Ethan was angry and told Vasil that he would write it down as his doge in triplicate. The demon agreed, though reluctantly. The warden moved toward the exit and asked Hestia to take care of the girl. He asked Hestia to take care of the girl, as Ashalot's opponent in this judicial duel was George. Ashaloth had originally chosen another opponent for the court duel, Jade Leon, who was the head of the Wise Serpent Medical Association. The man was a talented physician, but he knew nothing about fighting, so it didn't take Jade long to find a replacement for the fight. And it was Georg Lucan. Georg was a 9th grade mage, had a great drive and desire to participate and win in various competitions, and was also the director of a mercenary association. Yes, there was absolutely no benefit to him in taking the place of a medical wizard. The only reason why he agreed to take part in this adventure was the desire to defeat the strongest wizard of the continent. The judge announced that the court session was about to begin, so he asked everyone to take their seats. So everyone took their seats. The girl sat between the two adults and waited for the competition to begin. But at that moment, some sort of commotion in the room began, and a man appeared in the room who shouldn't have been there right now. It was a man who was smiling predatorily. He looked at the girl and said that there he saw the prize for today's duel. One of the duelists, Georg, burst into the room where the witnesses were sitting and stared intently at the little girl. Meanwhile, the judge came down from his pedestal and approached the man. The old man asked Georg to go back to his waiting room, for there was a witness room. But the magician did not listen to the judge, conjured a magic circle and began to move around the room. He managed to get past Hestia, who asked the little girl to stay behind her back, but it was too late, and Georg grabbed her practically by the throat. The duelist lifted the girl up by her throat, looked at her and said she was too skinny, and assumed she wasn't fed at all. The girl dangled her legs and begged to be let go. Hestia also looked angry and demanded that Georg Lucan put the girl on the floor. The little girl resisted and asked to be released. But the man thought it was all a joke and a game, so he did not hurry to let Elizabeth go and told everyone around to calm down. Otherwise he would get scared and cripple the prize. This answer did not satisfy the woman, so she conjured up a fireball and said that if he did not let the child go, he would not only lose his hand, but also his head. The judge was in a panic, demanding that the witness stop using magic in that room, and he demanded that George Lucan put the witness on the ground. But the mercenary and today's duelist ignored the judge's instructions and said that he expected the enchantress with the eye of truth to have a different look and be much busier than this little one. Nevertheless, the girl was not afraid of him, as she already had something to compare it to. For example, the meeting with Skula was many times more dangerous and scary. She was in pain and discomfort, her eyes were closing, the silhouettes of people were fuzzy, but she knew that somewhere around this room was Ashaloth. Her sixth sense did not deceive Elizabeth. The purple flames of Ashaloth's magic flew past her and cut off the hand of Georg who held her. As the man released her from his grip, she fell to the floor, with her saviour standing in front of her, covering her with himself. The look and expression on the mage's face did not bode well, more like a long and painful death. At that very moment, the girl reached her hand to the edge of his cloak and began tugging it, calling his name. Hestia felt the tension and danger of the situation, so it occurred to her that it was probably best to take the girl away, because if the man lost his temper, he might hurt the child inadvertently. But Ashalot did not justify her suspicions. He turned to Elizabeth and gently held out his hand to her. Then silently, without saying a word, he raised it to his eye level. The expression on the woman's face and her reaction to such a gesture from the man was hard to convey in words. But let's just say that she was very much surprised. Then the girl hugged Ashalot tightly, and he stroked her back gently and tenderly with his hand. They did not say a word. Everyone in the room was stunned. Hestia had never seen or expected that the strongest and most evil mage on the continent was babysitting a small child. Ashalot told Georg that it was not permissible for a self-respecting mage to use magic to bully small children. It meant only one thing. His opponent had no pride at all. But that didn't impress the mercenary. He was already reaching for his arm, which was lying on the floor. He put the limb back in place and asked his opponent about the fact that perhaps it would be better for them to apologize to each other now and go figure things out in the arena when the limit on their abilities was set. But Georg was willing to take that step personally, if Ashaloth asked him to on his knees. Ashalot stroked Elizabeth's head. He didn't understand why it was Georg who had volunteered to be the substitute in the court duel. The problem was that he didn't care about politics. Only fun mattered to him. The mage wanted madly to kill his opponent right now, but that would cause more problems, and he would be in Ethan Morse's debt. And being in Ethan Morse's debt was costly. The man was afraid that Elizabeth might be in trouble because of his rash act. He had no more strength to put up with these assholes, but he knew that for the girl's sake, he had to pull himself together and win the duel. Hugging the girl even tighter, he told himself to bitch whatever happened now. And Georg continued to provoke him by saying that first, when he defeated Asheloth, the girl would fall into his hands, and only then would he deliver her to Elbanu. The mercenary got angry. He said he had taken a liking to an evil spirit recently, and that spirit had a taste for little girls. The guardian of the Great Treaty repeated to himself like a mantra about patience, but his opponent was pissing him off more and more. Georg smiled and said that Ashelt shouldn't worry as he wasn't going to sacrifice the baby girl. Elizabeth shuddered. The magician sensed it and asked his rival if he knew where he had found the child. Georg confirmed Ashelot's hunch. He knew the circumstances under which he had found the girl. At that moment, Hestia, who had been watching, noticed that Asheloth smiled. She realized that they were all in trouble in a very big way. The man gently set Elizabeth on the floor and turned to Georg Lucan. He gave his opponent a moment to consider what he wanted his family to put in his coffin, as he wasn't going to leave even ashes of him. It was clear by the terrifying power of the magic that emanated from him. Meanwhile, the competitors moved with fire into the arena. The spectators had conjured up extra shields to protect their heads from the rocks falling on them. They tried to remember how many times these two had fought before. It turned out to be the 7th clash in a year. The women predicted that the mercenary would finally die today at the hands of Ashelot. But another lady was certain that someone would surely intervene in the fight and keep Georg from dying. At that moment, George flew over the heads of the crowd like a bird, which caused enthusiastic shouts of applause. Asheloth Vane was already waiting for him in the arena, calmly and without unnecessary pathos. Everyone in the stands had their own opinion on who should win. Some shouted for Ashelot to die quickly, others called for Georg to transform, and others shouted to the unknown person to lose. The defender of the Grand Treaty did not react to all of this in any way, but simply waited for his opponent's next move. And he waited. Georg took his new form. It was the body of a huge reptile like a dragon. The magician felt very good and free in this body. The reptiloid was confident in his abilities, so he advised Asheloth to prepare for another attack, for his new form was resistant to light and fire, meaning Asheloth's magic was useless. Ashelt's face expressed no emotion. He only said that transforming into a creature taller than 8.5 meters violated the terms of the Great Treaty. The contrast was inexpressible. The mage seemed like a bug against the reptile. But after his words, there was a silent pause in the arena. Georg was shocked that apart from this speech, his opponent had nothing to say to him, after what he had seen with his own eyes. But then he decided that it didn't matter, since his opponent always had a brick face. The mercenary in the monster's body thought, and was sure that even if Asheloth did hit him with one of his attacks, he wouldn't be hurt. But something went wrong, and Asheloth pierced a purple beam of his magic into Georg's body, who began to slump backwards. The reptiloid tried to figure out what had hit him, and assumed it was laser magic, but he was sure that something like that was definitely not meant to harm him. But his prediction didn't come true, and the enemy wounded him. But Georg wasn't worried about it, even though he realized he didn't know how Asheloth had pulled it off. But since he had regeneration magic, he had no reason to worry. Georg didn't worry about Ashelot tearing off one or more of his limbs. The main thing for him was to gather all his strength and strike at one point. Most of the time his opponent used defensive magic, but now he was open and defenseless. The reptiloid thought about the fact that it was likely that the Guardian of the Great Treaty had lost all of his high-level magic during the battle with Elder Lich. It seemed to Georg that the only workable option his opponent had left was to dodge his attacks with teleportation magic. The mercenary thought he was smarter than the mage opposite, so he thought he had calculated this option and prepared counter-magic. But for some reason, Asheloth was too calm and didn't move from his seat. Georg was sure they were all enjoying Wayne's suffering right now. In general, counter-magic was a special kind of magic that could only be activated under certain conditions. Georg's counter-magic, which he had set up in the arena, was to activate an explosion at the point where teleportation magic would trigger. But this time too, Ashaloth outsmarted him, so when the counter magic was activated, the teleportation point and epicenter of the explosion became the mercenary's own forearm. Strangely enough, Vane had teleported some iron from the arena into Georg's body, so the mercenary deactivated his counter magic to avoid being left without anything else. Georg was on his knees and realized that he had to hit his opponent at least once. Ashaloth was now taunting him and asking him why he had lost all his fervor. The man wanted to attack Vane again, but something went wrong again and a bullet entered the ground in front of him. But the problem was that this was no ordinary bullet, and the casing of this object was coated with adamantium. Now Georg was already quoting the provisions of the Great Treaty and saying that it was forbidden to use magic that exceeded the speed of light. But his opponent responded in the same way as the reptiloid had earlier. But talking tired Ashaloth, and he pulled out another such bullet and used magic to launch it at Georg. In the room upstairs, Hestia and Elizabeth were watching what was happening in the arena through an opening in the wall. The girl was worried about her saviour. The little girl couldn't stand it and asked the woman standing next to her if something truly terrible was going to happen. Hestia realised that it would be foolish to rule out such a possibility at this rate. She knew that Georg might die this time. For Hestia, Georg's behaviour was completely understandable. He often did it. But Ashaloth was a different matter. He could have ended this duel with a single blow a long time ago. The girl turned her head around. She realised from the people's reactions that Ashaloth was probably winning the court duel. But she could see that the matter smelled like kerosene, for there was something insanely strange and unusual going on inside the man. The little girl realised it wasn't anger or the result of a bad mood. She also had a feeling that if the black curl that was now in her saviour's body left it, it would be very bad for everyone. Elizabeth didn't understand where she got this knowledge and confidence from, but she realised that she needed to act right now, immediately. So mentally she called out to her demon Skulu. He heard her and woke up lying on the soft bed. Suddenly the demon realised that the girl wanted to summon him. Cold sweat broke out on his muzzle, and yes, he was absolutely right. The girl asked him with all her heart to come to her aid. Skula wasn't happy. He meowed menacingly and shouted that she must be completely out of her mind. So the demon that Elizabeth stole from Balzac was called Skula. He was a first-class demon who could subdue weaker demons and evil spirits, so it took even Elder Leech a lot of effort to establish a contract with him. Because Skula considered himself an exceptional demon, he demanded respect and honour for himself. So when he met his new contractor, the girl Elizabeth, he realised that she didn't put him down for anything, but in the depths of his demon's soul, he hoped that there would come a day when she would appreciate him and begin to cherish and nurture him. But when he found himself in the witness room at the trial arena, he began to shake with anger. He grudgingly muttered that he hated his contractor for his inappropriate behaviour with the summoned. Cheekbone hiccuped as Elizabeth approached him, and from the look of her, he realised that he was definitely not going to get respect from her today. Because she didn't think long, she took him by the scruff of the neck like cat moms take their kittens and lifted him into the air. Elizabeth, taking a good swing at the demons, took aim. The same one screamed that she was crazy, that he was having déjà vu. Skula screamed in a voice that was not his own. He demanded that their contract be terminated immediately, right now, and waved his paws pitifully in the air. But the girl pretended not to hear his cries, and launched him like a throwing disc into flight, ordering him to fly to Ashaloth by any means necessary. And the demon kept screaming with pleas to terminate their contract. Hestia stood behind the girl, and couldn't believe her eyes, as she witnessed this little girl with the eye of truth hurl a first-class demon into the arena where two mages were fighting. The girl looked at the woman and innocently asked if it was wrong to do that to summon demons. Hestia said that yes, it was wrong. It broke all the rules, and such behaviour with summoned demons was forbidden. But if it was a repeated summoning of a demon, there was no punishment for it. But the woman was concerned and interested in other things now. Why she was hurling the demons she had gotten with such great difficulty. The girl didn't know how to explain it all to her, so she said she knew that if she didn't stop Ashaloth right now, something very bad could happen. Hestia had said that Ashaloth need only snap his fingers to have this over-pumped lizard lying at his feet, so she didn't understand the girl's excitement. Elizabeth clutched her dress in her fist and said that some very strange glow had appeared and was growing inside Ashaloth, the meaning of which she did not yet understand. Hestia didn't understand what the girl was trying to tell her either, So for starters, she offered to bring poor Skulu back, because Vane would attack the demon without a second thought when he saw him in the arena. Meanwhile, the demon was in free flight, and he was crying and yowling pitifully in a cat-like manner, out of resentment for this treatment. But the girl didn't want to listen to either her demon or her new acquaintance, as she had to get a message to Ashlot to stop at all costs, or it would be bad business, and she couldn't get to the arena any other way. At that moment, something strange began to happen in the room, and in the arena as a whole, the structure's honours began to fall with a clatter on the visitors. Hestia quickly hugged the girl, covering her with herself, and began to loudly resent the fact that she didn't understand what was happening, or why the ground had begun to shake beneath their feet. Then she assumed it was Vasil's weirdness. Meanwhile, with the help of a magical item, one of the arena workers was contacted by the president of the Magicians Association and told that this time it was not him, but someone else. The man gave the woman the order to bring Elizabeth to the box for special spectators, for the situation was very dangerous. This angered Hestia, for even in a situation where everything was falling apart, her boss thought only of his own benefit. Then the referee spoke up and asked everyone to look up, which they did, and there was a serious problem. The barrier was about to collapse. Hestia caught a glimpse of something she had long known without prompting. She could see the special spell forming in the sky that had ended the war between the wizards 50 years ago. This spell became Asheloth Vane's calling card from that time on. It was the setting sun. The woman realized that if there was a direct hit on any person or object, even the ability to regenerate would not help him. She realized that Georg would not be able to resurrect himself, even if he wanted to. But the point was different. Not only Georg would die, but so would everyone else in the judicial arena. The man asked Hestia what they should do. The woman said he knew what to do. She said that as soon as the barrier was gone, they would need to teleport to safety. Just then, she noticed that Elizabeth had disappeared right out of her hands. Suddenly, she remembered that some legends said that not only could a contractor summon a demon, but the process could happen the other way around as well. Hestia was now convinced that it was not just a legend, but the real truth. For Elizabeth was beside her demon, clutching him to her and screaming in surprise as well. Ashelot saved the girl and Skula from falling to the ground. He caught them like fluff in the air. The man stared intently at the girl in his arms while she tried to read his emotions and mood. It seemed to her that he wasn't angry, and that was a good sign. The man had one question so far. He was curious about Elizabeth's motives. She was as straightforward as ever, and said that although she didn't know exactly what he wanted to do, she would ask him to stop and not do it. The man was extremely surprised, as he realized that the girl had used extremely rare and powerful magic, which not even all experienced wizards were able to control, and she did it only to stop him. The girl, on the other hand, looked at him holding her hurt demon, and said she was fine. That's why she asked him to stop conjuring, and then asked if he really hated her. It was like a blow to the man's head. He didn't understand how the girl could have such thoughts, for he had never allowed even the slightest possibility of such a thought. At this point, Asheloth was attacked by Georg in lizard form, and told that he had no right to be distracted from their fight. Vane, on the other hand, did not attack or defend himself as he had Elizabeth in his arms, so he teleported within the arena, evading the mercenaries' attack. When the man was on the podium, he told the girl that he had left her not because he hated her, but because he had some important business to attend to. Elizabeth asked him again. It was important for her to be sure that he didn't dislike her, and he confirmed it again. Ashelot looked at the little girl and said that he could not help but go to the judicial duel, for if he refused, Elizabeth would be deprived of her right of choice. Skula, on the other hand, sat in his mistress's arms and felt extremely uncomfortable. And the girl as if did not notice it and looked only at her saviour. She knew that he was doing all this to protect her. He didn't understand what she was doing here, but he assumed that Ethan Morse had a hand in it. The girl didn't object, and said that Ethan had told her that if she became a witness, she could help Ashelot. But Georg was angry that Vane wasn't fighting him normally, but was chatting with some girl, so the mercenary conjured fire and wanted to attack the enemy. And Elizabeth used the Eye of Truth again, and saw the glow and the changes happening to the guardian of the Great Compact. The young sorceress knew, intuitively, that Asheloth's essence was about to break out of the line, but the girl did not know what the edge was. The little girl thought and realized that nothing was written about it in the book, but perhaps she sees and understands this very edge because she uses the eye of truth. Elizabeth decided to leave all questions for later, for the most important thing was to save Ashlot Vane's life. So the girl told the man that, as strange as it sounded, he had a beautiful swirl inside that she could see. Georg, however, gave them no rest, and again with a shout and Vane's name on his lips, he rushed into another attack. The continent's strongest mage himself didn't blink an eye and created his own magic circle, activating it. Then he looked at the girl and asked about the whirlwind. Elizabeth confirmed her words. She said that this swirl sparkles, shimmers and swirls inward, and then added that it was very beautiful. The girl continued. She said that when the mage summoned that huge ball of fire, that very swirl began to change and spread throughout his body, and that shouldn't be the case, and if it got out of bounds, trouble would happen. Ashlot tensed a bit, for he didn't expect anyone to be able to see his facet. The girl hesitated, but confirmed it. Ashlot stared intently at the little girl. He knew and was certain that a person could only know about a facet if they were told about it, so he did not understand how this child knew about it. It was a revelation to him that she had seen his facet with her own eyes. The man knew that the eye of truth allowed its master to see the true name of any demon or evil spirit, but even that ability had its limit. After all, the very soul and facet of the body could only be seen by the highest level of master. So he had a logical question about what kind of hurt child he had found in that cave. The man was also aware of the state his body was in right now. The mage realized that during the battle with Balzac, he had used almost all of his mana reserves, so he needed to hibernate in the spatial workshop for at least a month. But he could not afford such a luxury now. And the girl took his silence personally and stubbornly said she was telling the truth. He sighed and said he believed her. He agreed with her words and confirmed that his body was in no condition to let that much magic through without consequences. Elizabeth was pleased. She thought she had gotten through to his heart. But it wasn't to be. Ashloth wasn't going to back down from his plan. He said that once he'd made her a promise to protect her at all costs, he wouldn't back down now, or any time in the future. So this spell was the least he could do for her. The girl objected. She didn't want the man to suffer or even die because of her. He knew that too, so he said it wasn't her fault. Skula, however, sat in his mistress's arms and trembled. At this point, he conjured a magic circle, and before activating it, he said that he was doing all of this of his own free will and because he wanted to. Ashlot used a space trick to get the little girl to leave the arena. She reached out to him and asked him to wait. Thus, he moved the girl to Hestia. The woman was surprised at the sudden appearance of the little girl. The woman sat down beside the little girl. She was glad she was quite safe and sound, but Elizabeth did not understand why Ashlot had disobeyed her and sent her away. She had warned him of the danger. But the girl wasn't going to give up and leave things as they were, so she wanted to make one more attempt and stop the mage, so she asked Skula to move them to Ashaloth one more time. At that moment, Hestia grabbed the demon in the guise of a cat by the scruff of its neck and ripped it away from its mistress, and threw him aside with all her might. Kitty Skula took a big hit, but the woman felt no remorse because she didn't want Elizabeth to get more involved. Hestia shook Elizabeth by the shoulders and asked her if she realized how dangerous it was to be around a wizard who was about to use battle magic. It didn't help, for only Ashaloth mattered to the girl. Meanwhile, down in the arena below, Ashaloth Vane began to activate his battle magic, so there was an explosion and a fire started. Hestia couldn't believe her eyes. She knew it would take at least half an hour to prepare such a spell, even if you were an experienced and very powerful mage. Georg in his lizard body was extremely indignant. He screamed as he flew towards Vane about how he really wanted to turn his body into a sieve. The man did not move from his seat. He was in no way moved by his opponent's words. He generally expressed no emotion. Georg didn't understand why he was losing again, but was determined to fight as many times as it took until he defeated this emotionless mage. The spectators of the court duel were leaving the court arena in a hurry, and fear as they did not want to get crushed, but they thought that the opponents were definitely crazy this time. But Vasil and Ethan Morse were sitting quietly in their box for the chosen ones, and were not going to go anywhere, but only watched what was happening. Though, if you looked closer, you could see that the demon was just a bit confused, but the man next to him was clearly enjoying the view, crossing his arms over his chest. Ethan Morse watched the duel with a cold, evaluating, rational and barbed look in his cold green eyes. Meanwhile, in the other room, Hestia watched the arena and realized that Asheloth had taken the plan to its logical conclusion. The woman was pleased that the flames had not reached their room, but that was for now. And Elizabeth was only now beginning to realize how powerful her savior was, and that this was the kind of spell used in the Great War. She felt as if the whole world was being reborn. At that moment, with all four of his feline paws on the girl, Squaw jumped on her. He covered her face with his little body. The girl became indignant as the demon climbed on her head and scratched with its paws. She didn't understand what was happening to it. Skula, on the other hand, said that this place was now filled with high-density magic that could cause magical pollution. For that reason, Skula wanted to ask the girl for permission to create a protective barrier. Elizabeth was beginning to understand what Skula wanted from her, but then it didn't matter to her at all. What happened to Asheloth, on the contrary, took on even more significance. And then she saw him. He was standing amid tongues of scalding flame, all glowing and shimmering with cosmic hues. Elizabeth was drawn to it. It was so beautiful. She wanted to touch this beauty beyond words with her fingertips, but Skula wouldn't let her do that and slapped her arm with his paw. And Elizabeth at that moment remembered the words Ethan Morse had said in the carriage about the other possessors of the Eye of Truth. Now she understood them very well. Hestia insisted that the girl leave the arena with her, as it was too dangerous to be here, but she heard an unequivocal and confident no to her proposal. The girl, however, was determined to rescue Asheloth right out of this room, and she didn't want to hear any objections either. But this behaviour and response did not sit well with the grown woman who had been ordered by Ethan Morse, her immediate superior, to protect the girl. She had no time to finish her speech, however, for a man entered their room and threw Georg's head in a reptilian body at their feet. The woman, however, realised that Georg's head was now lying in front of her. So a man came to their rescue, Balrog. Another man Hestia couldn't stand. The man who brought the reptilian head was named Belrod. He was a 10th grade battle mage who, before Asheloth's arrival, had been considered the best wizard in the land. If the man could be described in one word, then justice suited him perfectly. This man always believed that the duty of every wizard was to fight evil and protect the weak. He always maintained that the powerful had no moral right to lash out and hurt those people who were weaker than they were. Hestia stood looking at the man. She thought about the fact that he had refused a seat in the witness room before the trial duel began, and then a seat in the box for special guests. So he had been sitting among the regulars in the stands all this time, and now he had come right here. Balrog, however, repeated that he had come to the rescue, and even brought Georg's head with him as a token of the sincerity of his intentions. Hestia thanked him, as she realised that the mercenary without his head would not be able to use regeneration magic. But what she didn't understand was who he was going to help, because there were no wizards left here who needed his help. But she was wrong. The man looked intently at little Elizabeth, who was silent for now. This did not escape Hestia's gaze. She shouted that it was her job to protect the girl, so she asked him to leave. She was doing a good job herself. But Balrog had his own opinion. He was sure that the woman was not protecting the girl, but on the contrary, was only oppressing her, not considering her wishes and opinion. The man added that he had heard that the little girl wanted to stay here to save Asheloth Vane. But Hestia objected. She wasn't going to send the child to the battlefield to the mage on her naive wish. Hestia was shaking with indignation and incomprehension. She doubted and tried to prove to her colleague that such a small child could not save a wizard like Asheloth Vane. But here was the problem. The little girl insisted that she really could do it, while still holding her demon cat Skula tightly in her arms. Hestia began to calm the girl, and said that she had misunderstood her, that she meant that no one was forcing her to do such a crazy thing. But Balrog thought that Hestia was behaving very shamelessly now, and voiced it in front of everyone. The man looked at the woman and said that if she really did intend to protect this child, then she would not have remained silent when the mages from Elbana asked for her to be handed over to them. Besides, she should have condemned Ethan in the first place for bringing a small child to such a dangerous place, because he thought the woman in front of him was not a naive, innocent maiden who doesn't realise that their boss has far from bright motives and intentions about this girl. So, after all the above about her defending Elizabeth, just because she is a small child sounds silly, cynical, and ridiculous. The woman decided to speak out too. She said that the negotiations were so tense that it was a miracle to avoid a declaration of war. Besides, she thought that nothing would happen to the girl if she went to Holland. It made the man angry. He didn't understand how anyone could decide for Elizabeth. Yes, she was still a child, but adults like Hestia and Ethan couldn't see what was best for her and what wasn't. So he asked Hestia if making decisions for another person in her understanding was really a defense of her. The man and the woman were arguing. He wanted to support the little girl in her decision to stay. She wanted to fulfill her superior's assignment and get her away from here. Elizabeth herself stopped them. Nevertheless, Bolrod extended his hand to the girl and told her that he would support her in whatever decision she made. Elizabeth looked carefully at the man's hand outstretched to her and decided to ask his name again, since she didn't remember it the first time. The man calmly repeated his name given to him at birth. The girl looked at him carefully and said that she wanted Skula, Hestia, and Bolrod to help her. Skula looked at his willful mistress in fright. The man was willing to help the little girl in any way he could, but he wasn't sure about Hestia. But Elizabeth knew that her new acquaintance would not refuse to help her. Bolrod didn't understand where this child got such confidence from. The girl had said that if she didn't stop Asheloth's forces from going beyond the edge, he would kill everyone and anyone who hadn't already made it out of the court arena. The girl continued. She said that she had only seen his individual emotions before. However, now everything had changed. His essence was now raging like the ocean in a storm, so she could even read Asheloth's thoughts. Elizabeth began slowly pointing her fingers at the people: Hestia, Belrod, Nagi, the skeletons from Holland, Jade, Ethan, and Vasil. The girl reported that Asheloth had already decided to kill all of the above people. Hestia knew that Vane was a strange type, but why he was thinking that way now she didn't understand, so she asked the girl about it. He wanted to do it, because he thought that if he finished all these people, he wouldn't have to waste any more energy and time on these stupid negotiations. So he was already standing near the box where Vasil and Ethan Morse were. This statement sounded quite convincing, so Hestia was already carrying the girl on her shoulder in the right direction. Hestia ran and shouted that as soon as this mess was over, she would leave the Mages' Union. Nagi, who was trailing behind them, taunted the woman, saying that she had shouted it too many times, but it was no use. He made her quite angry, and she asked him rudely to shut up. The man argued that in times of adversity, it's best to hope for the best outcome, and then asked if his words had soothed the woman's heart. She couldn't calm down as she realized that they were going up against a monster like Asheloth Vane. This offended Elizabeth, and she said that her saviour was no monster. Hestia tried to apologize and said that she thought and compared his powers to those of a monster. At that moment, Balrog turned around and said that they would be running into the special spectators box in a few minutes, so he asked them all to be on their guard and prepare for a skirmish. The man noticed that the space around the lodge was distorted, indicating that Vane was already there, but they could also feel signs of life inside, which was a definite plus in their situation. The essence of their plan was simple. They needed to disarm Asheloth as quickly as possible so that Elizabeth could make contact with him. The only way they had a chance was if both items were accomplished, the only way they could save the man. The girl met Belrod's gaze and said that he was absolutely correct in his judgment of their plan. Bolrod, on the other hand, was already asking for a rundown on the current situation from Nagi, who, as a strategist mage, was advising them all to retreat before it was too late. Nagi said he didn't fully understand their plan to save Asheloth, so he couldn't say much about their chances of survival if they failed, because even though Vane wasn't in the best shape, he was still a very dangerous opponent. Then Nagi added that the spirits had whispered to him that the colour of their good fortune today was gold. So he winked wickedly at the girl and said they should try to do the impossible after all. Meanwhile, in the box for the special guests, an almost Armageddon had erupted. Asheloth hovered in the air in front of his opponents. Vasil didn't understand what had made the man so angry. Ethan, on the other hand, sat calmly in his chair. Ethan Morse, as always, was cold-blooded and calculating. He calmly looked at the mage and said that he did not hold back and created too many problems for everyone around him again. But Asheloth Wen successfully ignored this remark and asked where the walking corpse from Holland had gone. Ethan replied that as soon as the protective barrier had cracked, he had fled to his workshop. It was clear that this weasel wanted to escape from the very beginning at the first opportunity, so it was not surprising that he had prepared everything in advance, because his rivals were the strongest mages of the continent. Ashlot did not understand the logic of the walking corpse's action, since his direct opponent in the duel was George. Ethan said that there was nothing to be surprised about, as there were practically no mages equal in power to Vane. That's why the mercenary was chosen. Ashlot then asked Morse why he brought Elizabeth into the court arena. The man said that he thought it was a good and obvious decision, since she was the subject of this dispute. But Vane was no fool, so he interrogated his opponent. Really, it was only about the obvious solutions, and demanded an immediate answer if he didn't want to become a pile of ashes. But the man did not answer anything specific, for he did not know the answer himself, but he put his hands on his cane and moved forward a little. Ashlot didn't like that answer, and had already conjured a magic circle, and said he was anxious to see if the man would be so eloquent when all that was left of him was his head. Ethan Morse was also quite curious about it, but he knew that the time for such experiments had not yet come. Ashloth began to think about what was beginning to happen in the lodge. The first thing he noticed was the appearance of a field. Then curses and weakening magic flew in, which was part of the arsenal of standard magic techniques. Analysing the situation enabled him to foresee what was to follow such actions. Therefore, Ashloth was not surprised when he was attacked by Belrod, a battle mage. So the fight had begun. Vane realised that he couldn't see anything now, practically, because of the field and the weakening magic he'd just fallen under. On the plus side, he had already taken care of Georg, and he was no longer a problem. So there was only one battle mage left worthy of fighting him. And that worthy adversary was Bolrod, who was just about to attack him, channeling a stream of his magic into the hammer. From this information, Ashlot concluded that Hestia Miller was assisting the battle mage Hestia, and they were assisted in strategy by Nagi. Ashlot realised that each of these three was a dangerous and worthy opponent. Once again, Vane stayed still and waited for something while Bolrod attacked him. The mage realised that he was now fighting against three well-coordinated mages, but that didn't mean he would lose, for he intended to defeat them all. So Ashaloth gathered himself and blocked his opponent's first strike. Belrod was already boiling a bit, and said in his heart that he should miss at least the first blow for decency, but the guardian of the Great Treaty had completely different plans. So he let the provocation pass his ears and counterattacked his opponent himself, unleashing the power of his magic upon him. After that, a pleasant bonus was that Ashloth had his usual eagle vision back. Bolrod, on the other hand, had no plushies. Ashloth's magic stung and cut him with its merciless power and sharpness. The lousiest thing happened when the man lifted his head up. There in the air he saw the magic circle of the very same Vane spell that had been his calling card for years. The man realised they were too late. At this moment, it suddenly rained down on both battle mages. They both didn't realise what it was, or where it had come from on their heads, hence the dramatic pause in their fight. It was the work of Hestia. She conjured up this rain and told Belrod that she went to extreme measures, though she knows that after this rain there may be drought in these parts, so a man should use any means to neutralise the enemy. Ashloth Vane was silent. He looked at his hand on which raindrops were falling and realised that even though it was damned rain, it was still just rain. The man realised that the most correct solution and way to get rid of the rain would be to make it evaporate. At this moment, the last member of the group, namely the leg, decided to join the game. Now he was going to activate his skill. It was perhaps the cutest of skills all day in this arena. Two cute and cuddly spirits appeared and informed the wielder that the action had passed the check and activation was done. Nagi informed his friends that they had no more than a minute left and that Ashaloth's setting sun would make this box and the arena as a whole a living hell. He informed them that they had only one shot, and if it failed, he would leave them all here and run away. Balrog didn't need to be told twice and rushed to attack Ashloth Vane. He swung hard and then struck, only it didn't seem to go quite as intended again. Ashalot raised his voice. He asked his opponent if he naively thought that he, the strongest mage of the continent, could be easily defeated by neutralising the setting sun. Balrog admitted that they didn't have many options for actions and manoeuvres, so he figured it was better to try everything. even such a not-so-great option, and maybe they'd get lucky. Ashaloth himself thought this was complete nonsense and had already conjured one of his magic orbs. Balrog stood on the floor leaning on his broken weapon. He said that he was not ashamed to give Ashaloth the title of the strongest battle mage of the continent. At that, he was now coughing up blood, but for some reason, he was smiling. At the same time, Nagi was holding his wounded side and almost shedding a tear, and Hestia was indignant, for Ashloth had done her a good deal of damage with his spells, for she was Belrod's Aesister mage, and she thought Vane had no shame or conscience. Ashlot, meanwhile, had had enough of the lamentations and glared at Ethan Morse. Ethan Morse stood quietly, as if nothing had happened, with his arms crossed over his chest. It pissed Ashlot off, and he wanted to kill the slippery man to the point of shaking in his knees. It was Balrod's voice that brought Vane out of his thoughts of killing his superior, quick or not. The man said he had another trump card up his sleeve and smiled. However, Ashaloth did not believe the battle mage, raised his hand to the magic circle and asked his opponent to be silent and accept his death. Belrod's forehead was bleeding and he could hardly stand on his feet, but he said that they had something else for this occasion, though he didn't want to use it. But they had no choice. At this moment, Skula appeared on the battlefield under the effect of magic. The guardian of the great treaty stared at the white cat that appeared and fell at his feet. It looked like an unfunny joke or even a sneer. Skula was shaking with fear and resentment, rubbing against Ashalot's legs and saying that the wizard was right, and he, Skula, had taken the form of a white cat. And then Vane realised that if this demon was here, then Elizabeth was here somewhere. And he was right, as always. His Elizabeth was falling into his arms and falling through the portal. The mage didn't let her fall to the ground or touch her in any other way. He caught her, squeezed her in his arms and held her close. The girl was glad that she was able to grab and snuggle up to her saviour, and he didn't even push her away. That was a good sign. Although she realised that the wizard had no choice, because of his sorcery, there were traces of dangerous magic everywhere, which could harm her in direct contact. The girl, however, could not look at Ashaloth's essence, which was very beautiful and like a magnet pulled the girl to herself. But she didn't have time to admire his essence. She had to act quickly and surely to save this stubborn man. And to do that, she needed to understand him. The girl then made the decision to look into Ashaloth Vane's mind and climb a little further into the recesses of his mind if she wanted to help him. So, one of the main questions the girl had to answer was why Ashalot had relied so heavily on this judicial duel. It was being in the man's mind that helped the girl understand him a little better. In the man's memories, the girl saw Ethan and one of Holland's representatives negotiating in the study. She suddenly realised that if the outcome of that conversation had depended only on Ashalot's glory and power, everything would have been decided in that very room, and it wouldn't have come to this. The problem was that Ashaloth's replacement energy reserves were running low at that moment. Elizabeth also realised that battle mages often had to fight for days on end without breaks for food, rest, and other bodily needs, so they needed to compensate internally. This helped prevent them from feeling thirsty, hungry, and tired during battle. As a result, their bodies became perfect tools for battle. But the moment Ashaloth's energy reserves were running low, he had to absorb all the possible resources of his body and mana to defeat Balzac in battle. This decision put Ashalot in the state he was in now. His body had reached critical condition, so no one would be surprised if the man passed out right then and there. But if a mage who had reached the critical mark of energy recovery fell asleep, then it would take at least a month for him to awaken, to fully restore all his strength and reserves. But instead of starting the rebuilding process, Ashalot decided to find Elizabeth a good, honest, and worthy mentor. The man wanted to find someone who could protect the girl and like her at the same time. Vane was going to deal with this issue right after the trial, which he decided to speed up through a judicial duel. But his wonderful plan remained a plan because third forces intervened, and each of these parties wanted to ignore Elizabeth's wishes and use her for their own ends. Ashalot realised that he was not going to win this game of chess, and it didn't matter if he played white or black, so he decided not to let others win, so he turned the board over and the pieces fell wherever they went. The man was angry now for a reason. He had his own reasons. He'd decided to scare everyone involved in this trial so that none of them would ever think of getting their hands on her. The girl frowned, because she realized that it was in this strange way that the mage was trying to protect her. Elizabeth realized that many people had been either injured or killed because of the man's actions. For example, Georg was one of those people. Even though she didn't like him, she didn't want him to die. She also understood now what Skula had told her that morning about Ashello Vane. She realized that she didn't know the man as well as she thought she did. But even now, when she saw and realized that her savior was not such a kind and understanding person and was capable of terrible things. But even in this situation, she couldn't hate him. For besides all that was scary and dirty, she saw an image of herself that glowed with kindness and tenderness. She reached out to her in his mind. So the girl didn't hold back and stroked herself in his mind on the head. Such a thing made her happy, for Ashloth only treated her in a special way. It made her happy. But if you think about it, did she like everything that the wizard did? Because yes, his intentions were wonderful, but the way to their realization was, to put it mildly, wrong. Such actions paved the road to hell. Elizabeth didn't believe, and didn't want to believe, that just fighting and bullying other people forever was the only right and possible way to solve the problem. The little girl grew sad as she realized she wanted to both save and stop Asheloth. But would it really be too much for her alone? She was worried that she didn't have enough strength there on the ship to defeat the Elder Lich on her own. After all, if she had been stronger, this dire situation wouldn't have happened. The girl realized that it is she who is the main character of this fascinating story, because it is she who is a brilliant sorceress. But this desire arose inside her not because she was the protagonist of the story, but because it is she, the little girl who is at the point of the here and now, and not that adult, strong and confident girl who wants to become stronger. That was why she went looking for Asheloth's clot of lost power, and when she found it, she beckoned it to her and took it in her hands. The girl gently cradled Asheloth's strength and essence in her arms, hugged him, and made a promise to herself and him that she would protect him no matter what. Meanwhile, the fog and smoke had cleared in the special guest's box. Ashelot was still holding Elizabeth in his arms, and he glanced at her and realized that she had seen everything and more. But the man noticed that she was behaving as usual. The girl asked him how he was feeling. Asheloth was silent. He didn't understand why the girl in his arms was so calm and caring. After all, she had just seen his essence. All the summoners before her, who had wanted and tried to subdue him in one way or another, had always backed down unconditionally, for they saw before them a merciless evil monster. Elizabeth didn't act like all those other people. She was worried about him. She said that the glowing thing, which was mana, she had put back inside the man, so she didn't think he should be in pain right now. He dryly said he was fine. Since everything was working out so well, and Asheloth was feeling great, the girl asked him to fulfill one request of hers. The man asked if she wanted him not to kill anyone. At this time, Balrog sat by the ruined wall and held Skula. Elizabeth was greatly surprised. She didn't know that Asheloth was good at mental magic and could read people's minds. But that wasn't the case. Asheloth didn't like mental magic much, nor did he like it anymore. It was just that his intuition was developed and working at about the level of his young ward. He nevertheless decided to give his opinion on her request. So, Ashelot thought that if things were left as they were, the other people would try to make her a pawn in their game. It wouldn't matter which player won, because it would end badly for Elizabeth anyway. But if he kills all the key figures now, it will take at least a month for them to resurrect and recover. In that time, he would be able to return to his old form, which would mean that all the bad people would no longer be able to do whatever they wanted. But such a solution, or rather not solving the problem, didn't make sense to the girl. She was worried that the people he would kill would hate him. It wasn't a valid argument for the wizard, as he knew already that all these people didn't have warm feelings for him. The girl didn't want to believe such a thing, but when she looked at her new acquaintances, Hestia said she hated Asheloth. Nagi also shook his head affirmatively. So without much regret, or rather without any regret at all, Ashelot wanted to cast his spell on everyone. But the girl protested and asked him not to do so that people would not be even more angry with him. The man and the girl's eyes met, and they spoke to each other in silence. He said that there was no other way out. She assured him that there was, though he could not see it yet. Until that moment, the girl didn't know how to be either. But when she heard Asheloth's thoughts, but remembered something very important and useful for their current situation. The answer to the question that tormented her was stored in the book Wolfer's Story. Remembering this, she decided to try her luck and told everyone in the special guest box that she knew how to win the negotiations with Elbana. Of course, on the one hand, it sounded very presumptuous, but nevertheless, the girl hoped that her words would be taken seriously. She was not mistaken. Ashelot looked at her intently and asked if she knew a way to shut the skeletons' mouths. The girl nodded affirmatively. Elizabeth admitted that Ethan Morse had told her something. He told her a story about how Asheloth had once done a great wrong to the mages from Elbana, and that was why they wanted to take her for themselves as a compensation for moral damage. But if they could be convinced that Balzac was 100 times worse than Vane, then there would be no need to negotiate at all. The girl, however, said she could prove with certainty that Elder Lich's plans were far worse than what Asheloth himself had done. The man stared at him intently and silently. The pause was beginning to strain everyone around him, including Elizabeth. At that moment, Ethan Morse came to the forefront and said that whatever decision Ashelot made, he and the other mages would not cross him. So, Ethan played his game as always. He said that if the wizard wanted to support Elizabeth's proposal, he would personally take his side. And if the man wanted to choose another option of solving the problem, which he considered the best, he would not interfere with him. Ashelot, on the other hand, didn't know what to choose. She realized that if he wanted to kill all these people, he had to act now, for he would never find such an opportunity again. It was easier to deal with the idiots from the Wise Serpent Medical Organization. He didn't even have to worry about that. He decided to just hit their base, and they would scatter in terror. The Erigold Mage Association was another matter entirely. Asheloth realized that his battle techniques were designed to work as weapons of mass destruction. That is, they were too powerful and large in scale, and the mages in this alliance didn't even have a base of operations. Besides, it would be difficult if they split up and had to fight each one separately. So now he realized that he had to kill them right here and now. It was hard for him to make a decision and choose between killing everyone at once here in the lodge or believing Elizabeth and not killing anyone today. That's when recent events near the collapsed ship came to his mind. Then Vasil asked him if he was really willing to go to something like that. Then the demon held an exhausted girl who was unconscious in his arms and asked him if he was ready to take on the burden of responsibility. If this girl would shut herself in after his actions, would he be okay with that? Ashelot tensed at the fact that he remembered Vasil's words at this very moment. The man thought it would be foolish of him to backpedal, since he was already so far along in the execution of his plan. The wizard looked at the girl. He saw her nod at him. He suddenly wondered why he was becoming so docile and compliant around this child. At that moment, he broke the silence and asked the girl if she would be willing to go to Holland if her plan suddenly failed. But she said she would not go anywhere and would not even think of such a thing. Elizabeth said confidently that she would negotiate for as long as it took to persuade Holland's representatives to enter into a contract on their terms. Ashelot sighed. He didn't understand why the girl had decided to take the hard way. She could have just trusted him if she didn't want to go to Holland so badly. After all, the man realized that he had practically nothing left of his former reputation and nothing to preserve. The wizard looked at the little girl and said that she shouldn't try so hard to do anything. She would have to go to Holland, but she needn't be afraid of that, for she would only have to stay there for a month at most. The girl stared at him incomprehensibly. He couldn't realize exactly what he meant. The wizard looked at her and realized that she still hadn't figured out that she had gotten everything she wanted from him. So he stroked her awkwardly on the head and told her that he wasn't going to kill anyone today, like she wanted him to. It was perhaps the most happy and pleasant news for the girl in recent times. Ashelot said confidently that once he had fought alone against the whole of Holland, and if necessary, he was ready to repeat and consolidate his success for the second time. And today he was fulfilling her wish and not killing anyone. At this moment, Elizabeth realized that she was happy, so she smiled at her saviour and thanked him from the bottom of her heart. Watching this very strange scene and the couple, Hestia suddenly realized that Asheloth, if the girl was taken to Hollard, was ready to return there and kill all the inhabitants until they gave up her little girl. The woman was angry. She didn't understand this strange and dangerous man, how he could even think of such a thing. Vane had no idea how much effort she and Ethan had put into preventing a new bloody war from breaking out, and all because of the antics of this man, who was called the most powerful mage, and the man next to her, asking her to take it easy, to keep her blood pressure up. The woman was now yelling at the strategist mage, who turned out to be her ex-boyfriend. She asked him 100 times not to call her by her nickname. The man was almost sobbing. He thought she was very callous. After all, it had not even been half a century since they had separated. And there was another battle mage sitting against the wall, still in the same pose with the cat. He leaned the wreckage of his weapon against the wall. The demon cat in his hands shook. Skula thought he was the best of the best demons, and no one appreciated him and tossed him back and forth like real trash, so he wanted to start a riot. The rough and formidable mage suddenly felt sorry for Skula, who was in the guise of such a cute white cat, so he gently began to stroke him and scratch his ear. But Skula hopelessly repeated that he was requesting the termination of the contract. The girl sat in Ashelot's arms and asked him if it was over, if the court duel was over or not. The man did not know the exact answer, but it seemed to him that after such a beating, the representatives of Holland should have given up on themselves. And the girl didn't care about anything else. She was satisfied with the answer of the dearest man in her life, so she asked if Asheloth Vane could stay with her now. The man didn't think to resist, just covered his beautiful eyes and said that of course he was staying with her. Hestia was angry. She grabbed her head and told Asheloth to get out of here and fast, since he wasn't going to help her clean up the area anyway, but he could break or destroy something else. Looking at the once beautiful building that was once the court arena, it would be hard to recognize it in the wreck that Ashelot Vane had a hand in. Meanwhile, without hesitation, Ashelot and Elizabeth left the court arena and drove away. They arrived at the luxurious mansion of an obviously not poor man, and so the man and the girl crossed the threshold of the house. Two demons of very nice and unusual appearance came running towards them. They were identically dressed and basically the same. They said that a stranger had entered the house and considered it an illegal entry. Elizabeth realized that they were familiars. She had never met a true familiar before. The creatures were talking amongst themselves. They recognized the man as the Lord's godson, Mr. Asheloth. They also realized he had a guest in his arms.